I paid $300,000 for my daughter's fairy tale wedding in Paris. And I did it with a smile. I booked the chateau. I paid for the vintage wine. I even paid for the first-class tickets for her and her fiancé Lucien. I was sitting at my desk, with a glass of cheap bourbon celebrating the final transfer, when my computer pinged. It was an email from my daughter, Celeste. The subject line read, "Important Wedding Update." I opened it expecting a thank you note or maybe a photo of the flower arrangements. Instead, I read the words that killed the father inside me. The email said, "Dad, please do not come to Paris. Lucien and I have discussed this, and your presence will be a problem. You do not speak French, and quite frankly, your blue-collar mannerisms will embarrass me in front of the Beauchamp family. They are nobility. Dad, they are sophisticated. You are a truck driver. We will tell everyone you are sick. I canceled your plane ticket. Please just send the rest of the money for the catering. We love you, Celeste." I stared at the screen. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just took another sip of my bourbon and felt a coldness settle in my chest that was heavier than any engine block I ever hauled. I looked at the transfer confirmation on my screen. $150,000 pending. My finger hovered over the mouse. I did not hesitate. I clicked Cancel Transaction. Then I picked up my phone and called the fraud department at my bank, telling them to freeze the black card I'd handed my daughter. The next morning, I woke up to 41 missed calls and a voicemail that sounded like a banshee screaming. The silence in my house that night was heavy. It was the kind of quiet that usually follows a funeral. In a way, I suppose that's exactly what it was. I was grieving the little girl I used to hoist up on my shoulders. I sat there in my corduroy armchair, the fabric worn thin, just like my hands, and I stared at the digital clock on the cable box. It was midnight. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories. I'm glad you're here with me today. If stories like this one find you right where you need them, go ahead and subscribe and leave a like while you're at it. It means more than you know. Before we get into it, tell me in the comments, what's the weather looking like where you are right now? Somehow these stories hit different, depending on whether it's storming outside or perfectly still. Now a quick word, some elements of this story have been shaped for the purpose of narrative. Any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the heart of it. That email sat glowing on my laptop. The monitor's light, the lone source of illumination in the whole room, throwing shadows across every wall I had worked to own every comfort I had scraped together from nothing. I went back to that line one more time. You are a truck driver. She had typed it like a verdict, like something rotten, as though every mile I had ground out on the highway, the miles that bought her private education, and her ballet lessons, and her interior design degree had evaporated into thin air. She was correct about one thing, though. I am a truck driver. 30 years back, I had one rig to my name. The cab was my bedroom. Tin cans were my kitchen. Truck stop showers were my bathroom. Every cent I earned went into savings while the guys I grew up with were rolling around in brand new cars. These days, I run the largest logistics operation on the East Coast. My net worth clears $50 million and Celeste has no idea. She is aware I have trucks. She is aware I have money. But in her mind, I am nothing more than a middle manager who stumbled into a couple of decent contracts. She figures I am in this modest 3-bedroom in Connecticut because I cannot afford better. She has no idea I own the block. She has no idea I hold the deed on the building where her fiancé keeps his apartment. What she cannot fathom is that everything soft and comfortable in her life runs on my money. I am the engine. And she had decided to keep the engine running while she tossed out the driver. She wanted every drop of juice from the orange, but could not stand the feel of the rind. I pulled the transfer screen back up. Status canceled. 2 words. Never looked so good. 28 years of yes, and this was my first no. Age 5, she wanted a horse. I signed her up for lessons. 16, she had her heart set on an Audi. I bought something practical. She wept until I upgraded it. 22. She needed a year to find herself in Spain. I covered her rent without complaint. I manufactured this situation. That was on me. I sat there with my bourbon and owned every bit of it. But owning it did not mean lying down for it. I reached for my phone. Past 1:10 in the morning my time, which put it at 7 in the morning over in Paris. Unless they were still somewhere in New York. Frankly, it made no difference. I found the number for the credit card concierge and called. First ring, they answered. Mr. Dunning, how can we assist you this evening? I let my voice go completely flat. I need to flag a compromise on the supplementary card ending in 7213. That card is in the name of Celeste Dunning. The operator wanted to know whether it had been taken. I said no, it has not been stolen. The person holding it is simply no longer permitted to draw on my account. I need it reported lost or stolen. All transactions declined. Effective now. Done. Card dead. I set down the phone, finished what was left in my glass, rinsed it, killed the lights, headed upstairs. My knees announced themselves on every step. Decades of dropping out of cab doors and wrestling freight will do that to a body. Every ache in those joints was a year of hard labor that bought her soft palms. I stretched out on my bed and fixed my eyes on the ceiling. I braced for the guilt to arrive. What kind of father shuts off his own child? It never came. Instead, something else settled in. A kind of quiet sharpness, the way the road opens up when you finally punch through a fog bank that has been swallowing your headlights for miles. Clear lanes ahead, and they were going to be rough ones for Celeste. I went out cold and slept straight through. 6 o'clock pulled me out of bed the way it always does. That is just how it goes. 4 decades behind a wheel will wire a clock right into your bones. Daylight hits, and your eyes open, no alarm required. I got the coffee going in the kitchen. The smell of it, plain and cheap, spread through the whole room. Celeste used to give me grief about that coffee every chance she got. Invest in a pour-over setup, she said. Get yourself beans from Guatemala, she said. Black, strong, and cheap is how I take it, and I have no apologies. I carried a mug out to the living room and picked up my phone off the side table, lit up the screen. 41 missed calls, 50 text messages, 14 voicemails. A cascade of notifications pouring down the display. Every single one traced back to Celeste. I left the voicemails alone for now. I worked through the texts. Early ones read like confusion. Dad, the card isn't working. Dad, are you awake? Awake? Dad, call the bank. Then the temperature rose. Dad, pick up the phone. Dad, I am at the register. This is embarrassing. Dad, what the hell is going on? The final stretch was straight poison. You are doing this on purpose. I hate you. You are ruining everything. I took a long pull of my coffee. Best cup I had made in years. The phone buzzed live in my grip. Her name on the screen. I answered, pressed it to my ear and held my tongue. I gave her nothing. Just air. You old lunatic. The scream came through so hot it was breaking up the signal. Voices in the background. Music, the orchestral kind. She was in a shop somewhere. A shop that played classical music. Celeste, I said. The voice I used was the same one I reserve for the day I have to walk a driver off the job for showing up drunk. Even. Done. Don't you Celeste me, she screamed back. I am in the middle of Dior on Fifth Avenue. Do you understand what I am saying, Dior? The wedding dress is on my body right now, the one we selected together. The one that runs $20,000. And your card just got declined. The woman at the counter scissored the thing in half. Right in front of me, Dad. Said it came up stolen. Every head in this store has turned. These people think I walked in here to steal something. Fix it. Do it right now. I swallowed another sip of coffee. In my head, I could see her perfectly hemmed in by mirrors draped in silk and satin cheeks burning. And Lucian somewhere nearby, suddenly very interested in a display of scarves, wanting no part of this scene. I was under the impression you were concerned about embarrassment. Celeste, I said. What? What are you even? Fix the card. Wire the money. You wrote me an email last night, I told her. In it, you said my being there would be an embarrassment to you, that I am too rough around the edges, that I am nothing but a truck driver. She went quiet for just a beat. Then I heard the huff. Oh, we are doing this now. Over the email. Dad, do not be small about this. There is time to have this conversation later. Right this second, there is a woman in a blazer staring at me like I shoplifted something. Pay for the dress. No, I said. Excuse me, no. If my presence at that wedding is something to be ashamed of, then the money that came out of my hands is something to be ashamed of, too. A truck driver's earnings are dirty money, Celeste. Diesel and grease on every dollar. Letting it touch that silk would be doing you a disservice. Consider it a gift. Dad, you have lost your mind. Lucian is standing right here. His mother lands tomorrow. The fitting is scheduled. You made a promise. You said you would pay for this wedding. What I promised, I said, was to pay for my daughter's wedding. But a daughter is not what I seem to have. What I have is a critic, a referee. And since I have been uninvited from the ceremony, I will take it on faith that I am uninvited from the bills as well. The scream that followed was something else. Contracts, apparently. Something about debts I owed her. Something about how I was dismantling the most important day of her life. I ended the call. No drama, just a thumb on the red button. Quiet rolled back into the kitchen. It was a good quiet, but it had a shelf life, and I knew it. Celeste was in New York, 90 minutes from my front door in Connecticut. She had been standing inside Dior on Fifth Avenue, which meant the moment she hit the sidewalk she was pointed at me. Lucian would drive. That Porsche with my name on the lease. The two of them running hot, coming to collect. I pushed myself up and crossed to the window looking out at the front yard. That lawn I mow it myself. That fence I fixed it myself. Nothing fancy about the place, but it was solid, and it was honest. It was where she learned to ride a bike. Where I pressed bandages onto scraped knees. Where homework got done at the kitchen table and I sat right next to her. Now she drove past this house and saw something beneath her. Now she looked at me and saw a payment method. I moved to the closet, crouched in front of the safe, worked the dial. Click, click, click. Pulled the door open. Lifted out a file folder, heavy, stuffed thick. It held the material my attorney Gus had laid in front of me a week prior. I had not been ready to accept what it said back then. I'd tossed it in the safe and done my best to put it out of my mind. Gus had told me, Walt, you need to read this before you sign the checks. I told him to stay in his lane. I told him Celeste was in love. I told him the Beauchamp family was the real deal. Gus was a good lawyer. He was also my closest friend. We hauled freight together in the 80s. He went to night school. I bought more trucks. We both climbed out of the gutter, but Gus never lost his nose for a rat, and he smelled one in Lucian. I opened the folder. I looked at the photos. I looked at the bank statements Gus had dug up. I looked at the truth about the chateau in Bordeaux. I looked at the truth about Lucien's so-called career. I looked at the truth about the Beauchamp family's noble bloodline. I closed the folder. I set it on the kitchen table. I sat down and waited. 2 hours it took. I heard the engine first, the aggressive revving of a sports car that was working overtime to sound like it mattered. I looked out the window. The silver Porsche swung into my driveway and scraped its belly on the incline because it sat too low to the ground. Good. Lucien climbed out first. He had on a suit that probably cost more than my first truck. He was wearing those slip-on loafers with no socks underneath. He took in my house with a sneer on his face. He said something to Celeste. I couldn't make it out, but his body said it all. He was revolted. Celeste got out. She still had her makeup on, but it was smeared across her face. She'd been crying, not the sad kind, the furious kind. She came up the walkway at a march. She didn't knock. She still had a key. I made a mental note to change the locks. The door flew open. They came storming into my living room like they were executing a search warrant. "How dare you!" Celeste screamed. She flung her purse onto my couch, my leather couch. The one she always said smelled like an old man. "You stranded us," she yelled. The card got declined at lunch, too. We had to use Lucien's emergency cash. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Lucien stood behind her. He crossed his arms. He scanned my living room like he was worried the furniture might be contagious. "Mr. Dunning," he said. His accent was thick, or at least he laid it on thick. I'd heard him speak flawless English once when he thought I wasn't in earshot, but around me he always cranked up the French aristocrat routine. "Mr. Dunning, this behavior is unacceptable. In my culture, family agreements are honored. You made a commitment to pay. You cannot simply pull your support over a single email. It is childish." I looked at him. I looked at his $3,000 suit. I looked at his manicured hands. Hands that had never changed a tire. Hands that had never once held a wrench. "Sit down," I said. "I will not sit down," Celeste shouted. "I want you to unfreeze that card right now, and I want you to wire the catering money, and I want an apology, a big one. You ruined my fitting." I took a sip of my coffee. It had gone cold. I said, "Sit down." My voice didn't rise, but it had the low rumble of a diesel engine behind it. The kind of voice that used to make union leaders pull themselves upright. Celeste stopped. She looked at me. She saw something she didn't recognize. She saw the CEO, not the dad. She sat on the edge of the armchair. Lucien stayed on his feet. He tapped his foot. "You sent me an email," I said. "You banned me from your wedding." "It is not a ban," Lucien said. He flicked his hand in dismissal. "It is a strategic decision. The wedding is a high society event. My family, the Beauchamps. We have a reputation to protect. We have senators coming. We have dukes coming. Celeste loves you. But let us be honest with each other, Mr. Dunning. You are a simple man. You tell loud jokes. You drink beer straight from the bottle. You do not speak one word of French. You would be miserable there. We are doing this for you." For me, I asked. "Yes," Celeste said. She leaned in. "Dad, you know you hate these kinds of things. You hate dressing up. You hate fancy food. You'd be utterly miserable. We are just letting you off the hook. You can stay home. You can watch the live stream. We will set up a dedicated camera just for you. You can have your beer and your corduroy armchair, and you can be perfectly happy. And we can have our perfect day without worrying about you saying something to the Count of Monte Cristo or whoever." I looked at her. My daughter. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike in this very driveway. I remembered her crying when she skinned her knee. I remembered telling her she was a princess. So I'm an embarrassment. I said, you are just different. She said, you're blue-collar dad, and that's fine for here for Connecticut. But this is Paris. This is the Beauchamp. They trace their bloodline back to kings. You trace yours back to a coal mine in West Virginia. It is just oil and water. I looked at Lucien. He was smirking a small, self-satisfied smirk. He thought he'd already won. He thought I was just a dumb old man with a checkbook and an inferiority complex. I looked at the folder sitting on the table, the folder holding the truth about his bloodline. Okay, I said. Okay, what Celeste asked. Okay, I understand, I said. I leaned back in my chair. I rubbed my face with both hands. I let my shoulders drop. I made myself look smaller, older, beaten. You're right, I said. I'm just a trucker. I do not belong in a castle. I don't want to ruin your big day. Celeste let out a long breath. She smiled. It was the smile of a predator watching the prey start to limp. Exactly, Dad. I knew you'd come around. It is for the best. So you'll fix the card, Lucien asked. I looked at him. I looked at his shoes. I need a couple of days, I said. A couple of days, Celeste snapped. We don't have a couple of days. We leave for Paris on Friday. I need to move some money around, I lied. I canceled the transfers. It takes time to unwind it. The bank flagged the account for fraud because I made the changes in a hurry. I have to go down there in person. I have to sign paperwork. It's a whole process. How long, Lucien demanded. 2 days, I said. Give me 2 days. I'll fix the money. I'll pay for the catering. I'll pay for the dress. And you'll stay here, Celeste asked. I'll stay here, I said. I will not come to Paris. I will not embarrass you. Lucien clapped his hands together. Good. This is sensible. This is the right decision, Mr. Dunning. You are showing wisdom. Celeste stood up. She grabbed her purse. Okay, 2 days. But I need cash right now, Dad. The card is dead. I have appointments. I need cash. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my money clip. I had maybe $200 in 20s. I tossed it on the table. That's all I've got on me, I said. She looked at the pile of bills like it was a used tissue. $200. That won't even cover lunch. It's what I have, I said. Until I get to the bank. She grabbed the money. Fine, whatever. Just fix the transfer. We have the final walkthrough with the wedding planner Thursday. If the funds aren't there, they'll cancel the venue. I know, I said. I'll take care of it. She walked to the door. She didn't hug me. She didn't say thank you. She just walked out. Lucien fell in behind her. He stopped at the door. He looked back at me. You are doing the right thing, he said. Stick to what you know. Let us handle the world. He walked out. I heard the Porsche fire up. I heard them pull away. I sat there in the quiet. I looked at the space where my daughter had been standing. I looked at the $200 she'd taken without a second thought. Stick to what you know, he'd said. I smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was a wolf's smile. I know logistics, Lucien, I said to the empty room. I know how to move things from point A to point B. And I know how to shut down a supply line. I picked up the folder from the table. I opened it. I looked at the name of the bank in Paris, where Lucien claimed to have his family trust. I looked at the name of the real estate holding company that supposedly owned the chateau. I picked up my phone. I dialed Gus. Gus, I said. Yeah, Walt, he answered. He sounded like he was halfway through a sandwich. You were right, I said. I know I was right about what, about all of it. They just left. They told me I was too blue-collar for Paris. They told me to stay home and mail the check. I heard Gus stop chewing. That little witch. What did you do? I told them I'd fix it. I told them to give me 2 days. Why, Walt? Why give them 2 days? Cut them off right now. No, I said, if I pull the plug now, they just despise me and move on. They find their next victim. They spin a story about how I abandoned them. I want to end this the right way. What are you planning, Walt? I want you to book the jet. The jet. You just said you weren't going. I lied. I said I am going to Paris, Gus, but not as the father of the bride. Who are you going as? I'm going as the man who owns the bank, I said. Gus laughed. A deep belly laugh that filled the phone. Oh, this is going to be very good. When do we leave tonight? I said. Pack your best suit. We have a dinner reservation to crash. I hung up the phone. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. My daughter wanted a lesson in class. She wanted to lecture me about lineage and nobility and worth. I was going to give her a lesson she hadn't asked for. I was going to show her that you don't judge a book by its cover, especially when that book owns the whole library. I went upstairs to pack. I did not pack a tuxedo. I packed my work boots. I packed my jeans. And I packed the single most dangerous thing I owned, my black Amex and a folder full of receipts. They wanted the truck driver. They were going to get the truck driver, but they'd forgotten that a truck driver knows exactly how to run you over. I pulled my truck into the lot at Lou's Diner about 20 minutes after Celeste and Lucian had peeled away in their leased Porsche. This was not a place where you'd stumble across French nobility. This was a place where you found burnt coffee that tasted like battery acid and men who actually built this country with their hands. The neon sign buzzed with a dying flicker, and the air carried the scent of bacon grease and diesel. To me, it smelled like home. To my daughter, it would probably smell like failure. I walked in, and the waitress Patty gave me a nod without breaking her pour. She didn't ask what I wanted. She just pointed toward the corner booth. Gus was already there. If you looked at Gus Pelham, you'd see a man in a faded flannel shirt with a ketchup stain on the cuff and knuckles that looked like they'd been rebroken more than once. You'd peg him as someone who fixed transmissions for a living. You would be dead wrong. Gus was the sharpest corporate attorney on the Eastern Seaboard. He'd graduated top of his class from Georgetown Law, but he had no use for suits. He hated boardrooms. He preferred to do business right here, working through a club sandwich and drinking a root beer while he dismantled hedge fund managers over the phone. He glanced up as I dropped into the booth across from him. The vinyl squeaked under my weight. You look like you just got run over by your own fleet, Gus said. No hello. He went straight for the jugular. That was why I liked him. Feel like it too, I said. I flagged Patty for a coffee. Gus slid a manila folder across the sticky tabletop. It dragged over a patch of dried syrup. Let's start with the good news, he said, working through a fry. The acquisition of the Midwest distribution hubs is done and dusted. I squeezed the seller's legal team this morning until they folded. You now own the shipping lanes from Ohio to Nebraska. I took the folder with a nod. I didn't open it. I knew what was inside. What's the valuation, Gus? He wiped his mouth on a paper napkin. With the new assets and the government contracts we locked in last month, your fleet is officially valued at $52 million. Liquid assets are sitting around $8 million in the holding company. Personally, you're walking around with a net worth that puts you in the top 1% of the state. Congratulations, you old blue-collar bum, $52 million. I said the number quietly. Just a number. It meant I'd won the game of capitalism. I had started with the beat-up Ford and a dream, and now I was an empire. But sitting there with my daughter's voice still echoing in my head, $52 million felt like pocket change. It could buy a fleet of trucks. It couldn't buy her respect. She doesn't know, does she? Gus asked. He read my face the way only he could. We dug ditches side by side before he went to law school, and I bought my first rig. No, I said. She thinks I'm a dispatcher. She thinks I managed the fleet, not that I own it. She thinks the house in Connecticut is all I've got, and you kept it that way. Why, Walt, Gus asked, pointing a fry at me. Because you wanted her to stay humble. How is that working out for you? I took a sip of the coffee Patty had dropped off. It was scalding. It's not working out, Gus. She just banned me from her wedding. Gus stopped chewing. He set the fry back down on his plate. He looked at me, eyes narrowing. The lawyer surfaced. The shark that had been eating CEOs for breakfast for 30 years. Say that again, he said. His voice dropped a full octave. She banned me. I walked him through the whole story. The email, the black card, the visit to the house. I told him how Lucian had stood in my living room, wearing a suit I'd paid for, and explained to me that I was too simple to be around his family. I told him how Celeste said I was just a truck driver, and that oil and water don't mix. Gus listened without cutting in once. He just sat there, his face going harder with every sentence. His jaw tightened, the muscles working under the skin. So let me make sure I've got this right, Gus said slowly. You just wrote a $300,000 check for a party you're not invited to, and you're letting them treat you like the hired help. I leaned forward. The table shook. I'm not letting them do anything, Gus. I told them I'd fix it. I told them I'd send the money in 2 days. You lied, Gus said. A grin began to crawl across his face. A wicked, dangerous grin. I lied, I confirmed. I'm not sending a single dime. I'm going to Paris, Gus, and you're coming with me. Gus laughed a sharp bark that made a couple of truckers at the counter swivel around on their stools. I knew it, he said. I knew you wouldn't lie down for that. So what's the play? We go there. We put the bank statements right in front of their faces and watch them grovel. That is too easy. If I just show them the money, they'll apologize, sure, but it'll be hollow. They'll fall in love with the $52 million, not the father. I don't want their phony affection, Gus. I want to burn the whole fantasy to the ground. I want to expose them. I tapped the folder Gus had pushed across the table, the one about the business deal. You cracked open the logistics of the Midwest acquisition. In 3 days, I said. You found the skeletons in the closet of a company that had been clean for 20 years. Gus shrugged. I'm good at my job. I need you to be better, I said. I need you to dig into the Beauchamp family. Lucian claims their nobility. He says they own a chateau in Bordeaux. He claims they're old money. Gus snorted. Old money doesn't lease a Porsche, Walt. Old money drives a 10-year-old Volvo and wears sweaters with holes at the elbows. New money screams. Real wealth whispers. Lucien is screaming. Exactly, I said. My gut says he's a fraud. He talks about lineage too much. He name-drops too often. And Celeste is so dazzled by the idea of becoming a princess that she hasn't stopped to check a single fact. I want a full dossier, Gus. I want to know where they bank. I want to know who holds the deed to that chateau. I want to know if Lucien has ever drawn a paycheck in his life. I want to know what color underwear they wear. I want to know everything. Gus pulled a small notebook from his flannel pocket. He clicked a cheap plastic pen. I can have the preliminaries on your desk by tomorrow morning, he said. I've got a contact in Zurich and another one in Lyon. If these people are carrying debt, I'll find it. If there's a criminal record anywhere, I'll find it. If they're frauds, I will peel them like an onion. Good, I said. And Walt, Gus said, looking up from his notes. What about the wedding? The contracts. I smiled. It was the same smile I used when I sat across the table during the union strikes in '98. You're the lawyer, Gus. You tell me. I signed the contract for the venue. My name is on the deposit for the catering. Legally, who owns that wedding? Gus's grin spread wider. You do. You are the client of record. So if I decide to revise the guest list, I said, or if I decide to overhaul the menu, or if I decide to turn the reception into a corporate retreat for my top drivers, that is within my rights. It's your party, Walt, Gus said. You can cry if you want to, or you can make them cry. I finished my coffee. I put a $20 on the table. Get me that information, Gus. We fly out tomorrow night. I want to walk into that rehearsal dinner armed to the teeth. Gus tucked the notebook away. He got up and slapped me on the shoulder. His grip was like a vice. They picked the wrong truck driver to mess with Walt. We walked out of the diner into the cool night air. The parking lot was full of 18-wheelers, their engines idling in a low chorus of power and industry. These were my people. This was my world. Honest work. Honest sweat. Celeste wanted a fairy tale. She wanted a castle. She wanted a prince. I climbed into my pickup truck. I watched Gus fold himself into his beat-up Ford Taurus. Two men worth millions walking out of a diner that smelled like grease. She was going to get her fairy tale, but she'd forgotten that in the original stories, the wolves eat the children who wander off the path. And I was done playing the woodcutter who pulls them to safety. It was time to let the wolf out. It was 3:00 in the morning when Gus came back to my house. I hadn't slept. I was at the kitchen table with the same empty coffee mug from earlier and a bottle of aspirin. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like pressure climbing inside a boiler. I heard Gus's Taurus roll into the driveway. The car door slammed. He didn't knock. He just walked in. He looked exhausted. His eyes were red and his tie was hanging loose. He wasn't carrying a folder. He was carrying a cardboard banker's box. He set it on the table. The sound it made was heavy. It sounded like a judge's gavel coming down. It sounded like a prison sentence. I looked at the box, then I looked at Gus. Is it bad? I asked. Gus walked to the fridge. He pulled out a beer. He cracked it open and took a long pull. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Walt, he said, it's not bad. Bad implies there's some good mixed in with it. Bad implies a mistake was made. This is not a mistake. This is a catastrophe. This is a 5-alarm fire inside a dynamite factory. He sat down across from me. He tapped the lid of the box. I woke up my contact in Lyon. He told me I'd have to pay him double for the rush. Then I called a man I know who spent years working fraud for Interpol. He owes me one from back when I kept his nephew out of a DUI conviction in Connecticut. Between the two of them, we pulled the entire digital footprint of the Beauchamp family. He opened the box. It was packed solid bank statements, property deeds, court documents, police reports. Where do you want to start? Gus asked. The fake castle, the fake career, or the fake parents. Start with the castle, I said. That's the centerpiece. Celeste has not stopped talking about the ancestral home for 6 months. She showed me photographs. It has turrets. It has a vineyard. Gus pulled out a clipped stack of papers and slid them across the table. Here's the deed, he said. Or rather, the absence of one. The Château de Sainte-Hélène does not belong to the Beauchamp family. It never has. It's owned by a hospitality holding company out of Dubai. It's a wedding venue, Walt, a rental property. You can book it on Expedia if you've got enough points. I stared at the page. It was a commercial lease agreement. Lucien told Celeste it had been in his family since the 1700s. He told her the wine being served at the reception comes from his grandfather's vines. Lucien is a liar. Gus said the only thing his grandfather passed down to him was a genetic gift for deception. The Beauchamp rent the place for 2 weeks every year to maintain the illusion. They take photos. They host a gathering. They carry themselves like lords of the manor. Then they pack up their counterfeit Louis Vuitton bags and go back to their actual lives. And what does that actual life look like, I asked. Gus reached into the box for another stack. This one was thicker. It had red stamps across the cover. Bankruptcy, he said. Armand and Colette Beauchamp filed for insolvency in 2018. They ran a chain of dry cleaning businesses in Marseille that were fronts for money laundering. The French government came in and stripped everything, their Paris apartment, their vehicles, their accounts. They are flat broke, Walt. They're surviving on credit cards opened in other people's names. They're bouncing checks across 3 countries. A cold knot tightened in my gut. My daughter was marrying into a crime scene. And Lucienne, I asked, "What does the prince actually do?" Gus laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. Lucienne is a consultant. That's what he tells people. Do you know what he consults on? I shook my head. He consults the roulette wheel, Gus said. The man is a gambler, Walt, and not a talented one. He's been banned from 2 casinos in Monaco and 1 in Macau. He owes $180,000 to a private lender in Nice. These are not forgiving people, Walt. These are the kind of people who collect interest payments with broken kneecaps. Gus slid a photograph across the table. It was a surveillance shot, grainy black and white. Lucienne was arguing with a man in a leather jacket outside a club. Lucien looked terrified. I picked up the photo. My hand was trembling, not from fear, from rage. So the wedding, I said. The $300,000. Gus nodded slowly. He took another sip of beer. You're a smart man, Walt. You understand logistics. You know how to follow the money. Ask yourself why they were so insistent on you wiring the funds straight to their account in France, instead of paying the vendors directly. Ask yourself why they came apart when you canceled the transfer. Because they're not paying the vendors, I said. The realization landed like a punch to the chest. Exactly, Gus said. They need your $300,000 to settle the debt with the loan shark in Nice. They need it to keep Armand out of a cell on tax evasion charges. They need it to keep the lights on in whatever rental apartment they're hiding in. This wedding is not a celebration, Walt. It's a heist. They are robbing you blind, and they are using Celeste as the getaway driver. I stood up. I went to the window. The sun was beginning to bleed into the horizon. The sky had turned a bruised shade of purple. I looked out at my quiet street. I thought about Celeste. I thought about how she'd carried herself the day before. I thought about the way she'd looked at my furniture like it offended her. She is so naive, I whispered. She thinks she's marrying a prince. She thinks she's lifting herself up. She thinks she's leaving the truck driver's world behind to step into the aristocracy. But she's just a mark. She is a victim with a wealthy father. Gus stood and came to the window beside me. She's a hostage, Walt. That is what she is. But she's a hostage who fell in love with her captors. She's the one holding the gun to her own head. Does she know? I asked. Does she know any of it? Gus lifted a shoulder. I doubt it. Lucien is charming. He's a con artist, it's what he does. He probably showed her the fake deed. He probably walked her through that rental castle and filled her head with stories about his ancestors. She wants to believe it, Walt. That is the problem. She resents her background so deeply. She hates where she came from so much that she will swallow any fairy tale that promises to erase it. She is blinded by the shine. She can't see the rot underneath it. I turned back to the table. I looked at the box of evidence. It was a coffin. It was the coffin of my daughter's future. If I let her walk down that aisle, she would be destroyed. They would drain her accounts. They would leverage her credit. They would use her as a lever to get to me, and when the money ran dry, They would throw her away like a blown-out tire. I have to tell her, I said. I reached for my phone. I have to call her right now. I have to show her all of this. Gus put his hand on my arm. He held me there. Think carefully about that, Walt. Think about the last 24 hours. She despises you right now. In her mind, you are a jealous, petty old man who is trying to destroy her happiness because you can't let go. If you call her right now and tell her that her prince is flat broke, she won't believe a word of it. She'll think you invented the whole thing. She'll think you're trying to wreck it for her. She'll run straight to him, and he'll spin a tale about how you're a liar. He'll claim you paid people to fabricate those documents. He'll turn her against you for good. I looked over at Gus. He was right. He was always right. That's exactly why I paid him what I did. So what's my move, I asked. Do I just stand aside and let her marry him, let her throw her life away? No, Gus said. We go to Paris. We stick to the plan. You don't tell her. You show her. You show all of them. You wait until they're gathered in the same room. You wait until the lies are piled so high, they're ready to collapse. And then you pull the floor out from under them. I looked back at the box. I lifted out a bank statement belonging to Armand Beauchamp. It showed a balance of negative $14,000. There were charges from liquor stores and online gambling sites. These people called me simple, I said. My voice came out low and quiet. They called me uncultured. They stood in my own living room and told me I wasn't fit to sit at their table. They're projecting, Gus said. They're throwing their own failures onto you. They resent you because you're the real thing. Real money, real success, real calluses on your hands. They're ghosts. They're smoke. And they're scared to death that you're going to blow them away. I sat back down. I pulled the box closer. I got to work. I read every single page. I read through the foreclosure notices on the dry cleaning business. I read the police report from when Lucien was arrested for writing bad checks in 2014. I read the emails Colette sent to her creditors, begging them for more time. With every page, I turned the sadness in me shifted into something harder. It turned into cold, unyielding resolve. Celeste was my daughter. I loved her deeply, but she had been a fool, a snob. Her vanity had left her wide open. Her shame of me had blinded her to the danger sitting right in front of her face. A warning wasn't going to reach her. A warning was too gentle. She needed a jolt. She needed to see the monster with the mask ripped off. I closed the box. Full daylight was pressing through the windows now. Birds were going at it outside. It was shaping up to be a beautiful day in Connecticut. Start packing, Gus, I said. Gus smiled. He finished his beer. The jet's fueled and ready at Westchester County Airport, he said. We can be wheels down in Paris by tomorrow morning. I got to my feet. I felt strong. I felt the way I used to feel sitting behind the wheel of my first truck, hauling a double load through a snowstorm. The road was dangerous. The ice wanted to take me. But I had the horsepower to punch through. I am not going to pay for the wedding, I said. No, Gus said. But I am going to pay for the lesson, I said. And it's going to be the most expensive lesson they ever sat through. I walked to my bedroom. I opened the closet. I pushed the few suits I owned out of the way. I reached to the very back and pulled out my old leather jacket, the one I had on when I first started the company. It was battered. It smelled like oil and years of work. Celeste had always hated that jacket. She said it made me look like trouble. I put it on. It fit like it was made for me. I stood in front of the mirror. I didn't see a CEO. I didn't see a millionaire. I saw Walt Dunning, truck driver father, and the man who was about to bring the hammer down hard. We're going to Paris, Gus, I said. and we're going to introduce the Beauchamp family to the reality of foreclosure. Gus grabbed the box. "I'll drive," he said. We walked out to the truck. I never looked back at the house. The house was the past. Paris was the future. And I was carrying the storm with me. The drive to the airport was dead quiet. I thought about Lucien's smirk. I thought about the way his eyes dropped to my shoes. I thought about how he said Mr. Dunning in that practiced fake accent. He wanted a check. He wanted someone to bail him out. What he was going to get was a reality check instead. I looked at the box sitting in Gus's lap. That box was worth more than any sum of money. It was the truth. And the truth is the one thing you cannot buy your way out of. Celeste thought she was shutting me out of her wedding. She thought she was erasing me from the picture. She was about to learn that you cannot erase the man who laid the road you're driving on. We boarded the jet an hour later. As we climbed out over Connecticut, I looked down at the sprawling web of highways below the arteries of commerce I had helped build, and I ordered a whiskey. "To family," Gus said, lifting his glass. "To family," I said. "And to taking out the trash." I drank. It burned going down. It was good. Paris was waiting. The Beauchamps were waiting. Right now they were probably laughing, drinking champagne they had no business buying, toasting to the dumb American truck driver bankrolling their whole operation. Let them laugh. Let them enjoy the champagne. It was the last good vintage they'd ever taste because Walt Dunning was on his way. And I was bringing every last receipt with me. We touched down at Le Bourget just as the sun was going down over Paris. The sky was gray and miserable, and it suited my mood exactly. I watched the rain drag itself across the window of the Gulf Stream as we taxied toward the private hangar. Gus was already working his phone, snapping orders at his team back in New York, making sure every document was locked and ready for the ambush. I just stared out at the wet tarmac. This was the city of lights, the city of love, and I had come here to declare war on my own blood. We checked into the peninsula. I had no interest in the thread count of the sheets or the view of the Eiffel Tower. I cared about the secure Wi-Fi and the conference table in the suite. Gus set up his war room, immediately spreading the dossier on the Beauchamp family across the table, like a general mapping out an invasion. I poured myself a drink. It was time to make the call. My hand felt like lead as I picked up the phone. This was the hardest part of all. I had to sell the lie. I had to make Celeste believe I was the beaten dog rolling over to show its belly. I had to convince her that her words had landed, that I was ashamed of myself, that I had been broken down into something small and submissive. It went against everything I was made of. I was a man who had stared down union bosses and hostile takeovers without flinching. I did not submit. But for this trap to spring, she had to believe she'd already won. I dialed her number. It rang 4 times. She was probably screening it, expecting me to be on the other end, begging. "Hello." Her voice was sharp and impatient. "Celeste," I said. I kept my voice low, worn out. "Dad." She sighed. "I don't have time for this right now. We're at the venue. The florist is a complete disaster. Unless you're calling to tell me the transfer went through, I'm hanging up." "I'm in Paris," I said. The line went quiet, a long, cold silence. "What?" she hissed. "You're in Paris. I told you not to come. I told you clearly that you are not welcome here. Lucien said this would be a disaster. Why can't you just listen for once?" "I'm not here for the wedding," I said. That was the lie. I forced it out through clenched teeth. "I'm not coming to the ceremony, Celeste. I respect your wishes. I know I'd embarrass you. I know I don't belong in your world." "Then what are you doing here?" she demanded. I'm here to handle the money, I said. I told you the bank flagged the transfer. The amount is large enough that I had to sign the release documents in person. And I brought everything else, the check for the catering, the check for the dress, all of it. I heard her breathing shift. The anger was still sitting there, but now something else had moved in alongside it. Greed. The shark had picked up the scent. You have the money, she asked. And I have it, I said. But I can't just hand it over. Celeste Gus is with me. Why is your lawyer there? Because this is a significant amount of capital, I said. I'm transferring a large portion of my liquid assets to you as a wedding gift, but to do it tax-free to make sure the French government doesn't take 40% of it, we need to structure it as a family trust. It's a trust. She sounded like she was sniffing for a trap. It's for your protection, I said. It locks the assets in your name. But there's a condition. What condition? Lucien and his parents need to sign a waiver, I said. It's a standard document. It simply states that they acknowledge the funds are a gift from me to you. It shields the money from any creditors. It's a formality. Gus says we can get through it in 20 minutes over dinner. I held my breath. That was the hook. If she bid on the money, she'd swallow the whole thing. I don't know, Dad, she said. Lucien's parents are very busy. They have fittings. They have social obligations. They don't exactly want to sit down to dinner with you. Tell them I'm on a flight out tomorrow morning, I said. Tell them I just want to sign the paperwork, hand over the checks, and get back on the plane. I won't even stay for dessert. I just want to know my little girl is going to be taken care of. I let my voice go slightly unsteady on that last part. It was a good touch. She hesitated. I could hear her voice muffled, talking to someone on the other end, Lucien most likely. There was a low exchange of French. Then she came back. How much is in the trust? She asked. Say $3 million, I said. I heard a sharp breath pulled in across the line. That number was big enough to bury every doubt she had. It was big enough to make the fake aristocrats start drooling. Okay, she said. Her tone had shifted, suddenly warmer. Artificially warm. Okay, Dad. We can do dinner, but it has to be tonight, and it has to be somewhere quiet. We can't have a scene. I have a reservation at L'Ambroisie. 8 o'clock at L'Ambroisie, I said. She sounded momentarily thrown. That's actually acceptable. Lucien loves that restaurant. It has 3 Michelin stars. I know, I said. Gus booked the private room. Just us. No spectators. No embarrassment. Fine, she said. We'll be there. But Dad, please don't wear the leather jacket. Don't bring up the time you hauled manure through Kentucky. Just put your name on the papers and let us have a meal. I promise, I said. I'll be invisible. I'll be nothing but a signature on a check. Good, she said. See you at 8. She hung up. I set the phone down on the table. My hand was trembling, not from nerves, from adrenaline. The trap was set. They were coming. Coming for the $3 million. Coming to sign papers they believed would lock in their fortune. They had no idea that what Gus was preparing wasn't a trust at all. It was a confession. Gus looked up from his laptop. The printer in the corner was running, pushing out pages. They took the bait, he asked. Hook, line, and sinker, I said. They're coming to L'Ambroisie at 8. Gus let out a low whistle. L'Ambroisie, you're really going all in. That bill alone could run $5 grand. It's the Last Supper of the condemned, I said. Might as well let them eat well. I walked over to the printer and picked up the freshly printed pages. It was the document Gus had drafted, but it was no ordinary prenup. It was a page-by-page account of every debt the Beauchamp family carried. A document that transferred liability, A document that read closely would make plain that I knew every last thing. But they wouldn't read it closely. They'd be too busy staring at the fake check for $3 million I was going to slide across the table. Too busy sipping vintage wine. Too blinded by their own hunger to notice the steel jaws snapping shut around their ankles. I went into the bathroom to shave. I looked at my face in the mirror, old, tired. The past few days had put years on me, but there was something in my eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. The fire of the man who built a company from the seat of a truck. I shaved clean. I trimmed my mustache. I walked back out and unzipped my suitcase. I didn't pull out the jeans. I didn't pull out the work boots. I pulled out the suit I'd bought in New York 5 years ago for an awards dinner I never actually attended. Bespoke. Charcoal gray, Italian wool. It fit like armor. I put on a crisp white shirt. I tied a silk tie. I fastened the cufflinks Celeste had given me for Christmas 10 years ago, back when she still bought me gifts. Gus looked up when I came out. "You clean up nice, Walt. You look like a senator or a hitman." "Tonight I'm both," I said. We left the hotel at 7:30. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick, the pavement throwing back the glow of the streetlights. Paris was beautiful. It was a shame I was about to tear a hole straight through the middle of it. We took the hotel car, a black Mercedes. I rode in the back, watching the city pass. Couples moving along the sidewalks hand in hand. Families crowded around cafe tables. I found myself wondering where things had gone sideways with Celeste. Whether there was any single moment I could have steered it differently. Maybe if I'd been home more. Maybe if I hadn't given her everything she asked for. But regret doesn't do anything useful. You can't back a truck up once you're already on the highway. You just keep your foot down and drive. We arrived at the Place des Vosges. The restaurant was set back from the square, discreet, elegant, the kind of place where money doesn't need to raise its voice. The maitre d' greeted us at the entrance. He knew who I was, not because of any fame, but because I had purchased the building 3 years earlier through a shell company as a diversification asset. Gus had structured the whole thing. I had never once eaten here, but tonight I was the landlord. "Mr. Dunning," the maitre d' said with a slight incline of his head, "your guests have arrived. They're in the private salon." "Are they drinking?" I asked. "They've ordered a bottle of Romanée Conti, 1989. "Of course they have," I said. "A $20,000 bottle of wine. They were already celebrating spending money that wasn't theirs yet." "Put it on my tab," I said. "Let them drink." Gus and I moved through the main dining room. It was hushed and precise, people speaking barely above a murmur, eating food that looked more like sculpture than dinner. I felt large and deliberate in that space, but I also felt like the most powerful man in it. We reached the heavy oak doors of the private room. Laughter from inside. Lucian's laugh specifically, that braying, self-satisfied sound I had already grown to despise. I stopped. I straightened my cuffs. I looked at Gus. He gave a single nod, then tapped the breast pocket of his jacket where the documents were sitting. "Showtime, Walt," he said under his breath. I pushed the doors open. The laughter cut off clean. They were seated around a circular table dressed in white linen Lucien Celeste, and 2 people who could only be Armand and Colette Beauchamp. They matched their dossier exactly. Armand had on a suit that was pulling at the seams, his face already flushed from the wine. Colette was draped in jewelry that I now knew was either counterfeit or insured beyond its actual worth. Celeste looked stunning. I'll give her that. White dress hair arranged perfectly. She looked every bit the princess she'd always wanted to become. But when her eyes landed on me, her expression cracked. She looked at the suit. She looked at Gus. She looked confused. "Dad," she said. You look different." I walked to the empty chair at the head of the table. No smile, no embrace. "Good evening," I said, calm and level. Lucian half rose from his seat, eyes moving from my suit to his parents and back. He looked uncertain for the first time. "Mr. Dunning," he said. "We were just toasting to family." "Sit down, Lucien," I said. He sat. I looked at Armand and Colette. They were watching me with a blend of curiosity and contempt. The suit registered, but underneath it they still saw the truck driver. They still saw the mark, Celeste. I said, "Introduce us." She cleared her throat. "Mom, Dad, this is my father Walt Dunning and his associate. This is Gus Pelham," I said, "my general counsel." Armand raised an eyebrow. "Counsel, is that necessary for a family dinner?" "It is when we're talking about a trust of this size," Gus said. He set his briefcase on the table and clicked the latches open. The sound cracked through the quiet room. Colette smiled, tight, predatory. "Of course. We completely understand. Business is business. We are simply so grateful, Walt, that you have decided to support the children. It is a noble thing." Her English was polished, but accented, and it sounded rehearsed. "It's not noble," I said. "It's an investment." I sat down. The waiter filled my glass with the $20,000 wine. I didn't touch it. I just looked at it. "So," I said, "before anyone signs anything, before I hand over the check, I want to hear about the wedding. I want to hear about the family I'm joining with. Tell me, Armand, tell me about the chateau." Armand straightened up in his chair and swelled slightly. "Ah, the chateau. It is the crown jewel of the Beauchamp legacy. 6 generations. The history is quite extraordinary." "I imagine it is," I said. "And the vineyard producing the finest grapes in Bordeaux," he said. "We export exclusively to private collectors." I nodded. I looked over at Lucien. "And you, son, how is the consulting business going?" Lucien swirled his wine. "Booming," he said. "The markets are volatile. People need guidance. I have clients in Dubai and London. I'm actually turning away work." Celeste beamed. She looked at me with an expression that said, "See, I told you so." "Very impressive," I said. "It is a burden sometimes." Colette sighed. "The responsibility of wealth, the weight of tradition. You Americans, you are fortunate. You have new money. It is so much simpler. Old money is a heavy crown to wear." I glanced at Gus. He was working hard to keep a straight face. "Well," I said, "I'd like to help take some of that weight off your shoulders. That's exactly why we're here." Gus pulled the documents from his briefcase and set a thick stack on the table in front of me. Then he laid a single check on top. I watched their eyes go straight to it. Armand leaned in. Colette's tongue ran briefly across her lips. $3 million. Right there, within arm's reach. "But first," I said, pressing my hand flat over the check. "The paperwork." Gus slid copies of the agreement in front of each of them. "This is the trust agreement." I said the lie came out clean. "It outlines the asset transfer and includes the waivers I mentioned. Essentially, once this money changes hands, you acknowledge it as the full and final contribution from the Dunning estate. No future claims, no debts passed on to Celeste. It legally separates her assets from yours." Lucien waved his hand as if brushing away a fly. "Standard stuff. Where do we sign?" He picked up a pen. He didn't read a single line. Armand put on his reading glasses and studied the cover page. His brow furrowed. This seems quite thick for a simple waiver, he said. It's thorough, Gus said. We want to make certain everyone's protected, particularly with international tax law being what it is. Just sign it, Papa, Celeste said. Please, the food is coming. Dad has to leave early. Don't make this into a production. Colette pressed Armand's arm. Sign it, darling. We trust Walt. He is family now. Armand hesitated. Then he shrugged, flipped to the back page and reached for his pen. I watched. I watched the pen rise and hover above the signature line. I waited until the tip was almost touching the paper. Actually, I said. Armand stopped. He looked up. There's one small detail I neglected to mention, I said. See, what detail? Lucien asked. He was beginning to sweat. I reached for my wine glass. I took a slow sip. It was extraordinary wine layered dense tasting of soil and something darker. I set the glass down and looked directly at Lucien. I forgot to ask about the rent, I said. The rent, Celeste repeated. What rent? The rent on the chateau, I said. Seeing as it belongs to the Dubai Hospitality Group, and the rent on the apartment in Marseille, since the bank reclaimed that property back in 2018. The silence that dropped over the room was immediate and total. Lucien's pen rolled off the table and clattered onto the floor. Armand pulled his glasses off. His hands weren't steady. What are you saying? Celeste let out a nervous laugh. Dad, you're confused. The chateau is theirs. Is it? I said. I looked at Gus. He reached into the box, the one we'd carried over from the hotel, and began pulling things out. The deed, the bankruptcy filings, the police reports. He started laying them out one by one across the table, dealing them like cards in a card game none of them had expected to play. One in front of Armand, one in front of Colette, one in front of Lucien. This is the commercial lease for the castle, Gus said. This is the foreclosure notice on the dry cleaning business. This is the judgment for the 180,000 Lucien owes to certain gentlemen in Nice. I watched their faces. It was like watching a building come down from the inside. The arrogance fell away first, then the composure, then everything else. What was left underneath was fear, raw and ugly and undisguised. Celeste picked up the document in front of Lucien and read it. Her face drained of color. She looked at him. What is this? She whispered. It is a lie, Lucien shouted. He shoved back his chair and stood up, knocking it over. This man, he is lying. He is trying to destroy us. He had these forged. Did I asked. I took out my phone and dialed on speaker. Who are you calling? Colette shrieked. The concierge at the chateau, I said. Let's ask him directly who owns the place. Lucien lunged across the table for the phone. Sit down, I roared. I brought my fist down on the table hard enough to rattle every plate and shake the wine glasses in their stems. That was the truck driver surfacing the man who could swap out a tire in a blizzard, the man who had no patience for a small-time French con artist. Lucien froze. He dropped back into his seat. You are frauds, I said. My voice had gone quiet. Quiet is more dangerous than loud. You are broke. You are liars. And you tried to sell my daughter a fairy tale so you could cover your gambling debts. I looked at Celeste. She was crying without making a sound, tears moving steadily down her face. She was looking at the documents. She was looking at Lucien. And for the first time in 6 months, she was actually seeing him. Down, she whispered. Is this true? I looked at her. Every word of it, Celeste. Your prince is flat broke and your castle is somebody else's rental. I reached for the $3 million check. I held it up so every eye in the room could find it. And this, I said, this was the only thing that was ever going to save you. I tore it in half, then tore it again. I let the pieces drift down onto the white linen like confetti. Dinner is served, I said, but I seemed to have lost my appetite. I stood up. Gus rose with me. We're leaving, I said. Wait, Armand stammered. Wait, Mr. Dunning, we can explain. It is a temporary liquidity issue. The assets are tied up and we can renegotiate. Not there is nothing to negotiate, I said. You wanted a truck driver. You got one. And this truck just ran you over. I turned to walk out. Then I stopped. One last thing. The final nail. I turned back to face them. Oh, I said. One more item. I looked at Celeste. The wedding is off. I canceled the venue this morning. I canceled the caterer. I canceled the florist. You what? She gasped. I canceled it, I said. Since I'm the one paying, I decided to redirect the funds. Redirect them where? Lucian whispered. Shuckin', I donated the deposits. I said, to a trade school for mechanics in the Bronx. They're going to have a very fine graduation party. I buttoned my jacket. Enjoy the wine, I said. It's the last thing I will ever buy you. I walked out. Gus followed. We left them sitting in the wreckage of everything they'd built, the torn check, the documents spread across the table, the $20,000 wine that by now must have tasted like vinegar. We walked out into the Paris night. The rain had come back, but I didn't care. The rain felt clean against my face, like it was rinsing something off. I had ended my daughter's wedding. I had broken her heart wide open, but I had saved her life. And walking toward the car, sitting at the curb, I understood clearly that the hard part was still ahead, because now I had to put the pieces back together. I sat at the head of the table in the private salon of L'Ambroisie, feeling like a lion who had settled in to watch a pack of hyenas work over a piece of meat they hadn't earned. The room itself was practically an affront, tapestries on the walls that were probably older than the Republic, a chandelier above us trailing crystal that caught the candlelight and split it into 1,000 cold, judgmental shards. The air carried old wood beeswax and the kind of heavy perfume that layers itself on top of desperation and hopes no one notices. Armand and Colette Beauchamp sat to my left. Lucien and Celeste to my right. Gus was beside me, his briefcase on the floor, acting as a quiet physical boundary between our side and theirs. The waiter, a man in a tuxedo who appeared to have come out of the womb, sneering, delivered the menus. Heavy, leather-bound, written entirely in French. No prices listed anywhere. I opened mine. I knew exactly what I was reading. 10 years running logistics for a shipping firm in Marseille in the 80s will do that. I spoke French better than I spoke corporate English. I knew a Bordeaux from a Burgundy. I knew that Homard Bleu was blue lobster, and that it cost more than a week's wages for most of my drivers, but I held the menu upside down for just a moment to see what they'd do. I saw Colette nudge Armand. I caught a small, vicious smile forming at the corner of her mouth. She leaned toward Celeste. He is holding it upside down, she said in French, her voice low and fast, laced with contempt. Look at him. He looks like a bear trying to read a map. Celeste giggled. It was a nervous sound, but a giggle all the same. She didn't defend me. She didn't say a word to correct her. She took a sip of water and looked somewhere else. I righted the menu. I furrowed my brow. I tapped the page with a thick finger. I can't make heads or tails of any this, I said, letting my voice fill the room. I made sure I sounded as American as humanly possible. Do they have a burger on here or a steak? I like my steak well done. Lucien pressed his napkin to his mouth to cover the smile. Armand shook his head in slow, theatrical pity. "Mr. Dunning," Lucien said, smoothing his tie, "please allow me to order for you. This cuisine is quite complex. It demands a certain refined palate. We wouldn't want you to choose something that disagrees with your system." "Go ahead, son," I said. I leaned back and let the chair creak. "Order me the most expensive thing on the menu. I'm the one paying for it after all." Armand turned to Colette and dropped into French. "He thinks money buys taste," Armand said. "Look at his hands, scarred all over. He looks like a laborer who lifted somebody else's suit. I cannot believe we are breaking bread with this peasant." Colette patted his hand. "Patience, my love," she replied in French. "Think about the wire transfer. Think about the check. Once the money clears, we need never lay eyes on this animal again. We'll park him in a corner at the wedding and tell everyone he is a distant uncle who had a stroke." I gave them my biggest, widest, most vacant smile. "What are you folks chatting about?" I asked. "Sounds fancy. French really is such a romantic language." "We were just saying how generous you are, Walt," Colette said in English. Her accent was thick and sweet, like fruit gone slightly past ripe. "We were admiring your suit. Very robust." "Thank you," I said. I smoothed the lapel. "Got it on sale. 2 for 1. Gus kicked me under this table. He was enjoying himself. He knew the suit was bespoke Italian wool, but he loved the performance of it. The waiter came back. Lucien placed orders for the table. Blue lobster, truffles, caviar, a second bottle of the $20,000 wine. For me, he ordered the chicken. "For the gentleman," Lucien told the waiter in French, "bring the chicken and be sure it is cooked through. He has the digestion of a child." The waiter nodded without so much as glancing my way. As the food arrived, the mockery settled in and made itself at home. It became sport. They would take a mouthful of caviar grown with pleasure and fire an insult directly at my face in French, trusting my ignorance to absorb it like a sponge. "This wine is wasted on him," Armand said in French, tilting the glass so the light caught it. "He'd be happier with a Budweiser. He probably thinks terroir is somebody's dog." Celeste was drinking fast. She was already on her 3rd glass. I watched her. I waited for her to put a stop to it, to bring a hand down on the table and say enough. I waited for my daughter, the girl I had raised, to have a backbone to say, "That is my father, show some respect." She didn't. She wanted to belong to them more than she wanted to belong to me. "Dad," she said, working her knife through the lobster, "please try not to slurp your soup. The Beauchamps are very particular about table manners." I set my spoon down. I looked at her. "Just enjoying the meal, honey," I said. Colette leaned toward her. "You must understand, Celeste," she said in English. "Your father comes from a different world, a world of utility. Ours is a world of refinement. It is not his fault." Then she shifted to French, dropping her voice to a murmur. "He eats like a pig at a trough. Look at him mopping up the sauce with the bread. It is revolting. How did you come from him? You are so delicate. He is a brute." Celeste laughed. She actually laughed. "I know," she replied in French. Her accent was clumsy American French, but every word was clear to me. I tried to give him some polish, but he doesn't take to it. He's really just a wallet at this point. Once we have the trust sorted, we can put some distance between us. I don't want him around the baby when we have one. He'll pass on bad habits. That was the dagger. That was the moment the last thread gave way. She called me a wallet. She said she'd keep my grandchild from me. I reached into the breadbasket. I tore off a piece and dragged it dramatically across the plate, making a show of every stroke. I chewed with my mouth slightly parted. I watched Armand recoil across the table. This sauce is something else, I said. Tastes like gravy. Armand looked physically ill. I cannot take this, he hissed to Colette in French. Move the contract along. I want the check and I want out of here. I need to get the smell of him off my clothes. Gus cleared his throat. He caught my eye and tapped his watch, signaling we had enough. We had the recording. My phone was sitting in my breast pocket, capturing every syllable of their performance. But I wasn't finished. I wanted to see how deep a hole they'd dig. I raised my glass. A toast, I said. They all looked up. They lifted their glasses with the enthusiasm of people reaching for a dental instrument. To family, I said. And to new beginnings. I know I'm not the most polished man at this table. I know I can't tell you which fork is which. But I want you to know how much it means to me that you've welcomed me in. It means a great deal to a simple trucker to sit at a table like this. Lucian smirked. He raised his glass. To family, Mr. Dunning. And to your generosity. He drank. Under his breath in French, he muttered into the glass. To the fool who is paying for my freedom. I drank my water. I watched them swallow the expensive wine. I watched them work through the food I was covering. I watched them preen and posture, certain they were the cleverest people in the room, convinced they had outplayed the dumb American. They had no idea the dumb American had understood every single word. They had no idea that every insult was another nail they were driving into their own coffins. I looked at the fake check sitting near Gus's hand. $3 million. Their eyes kept pulling back to it throughout the meal. It was the only reason they were tolerating my presence. The carrot. I decided to keep dangling it. So tell me about the wedding plans, I said. What's on the menu? Colette sighed with the weariness of a woman being asked to explain a masterpiece to a child. Oh, Walt, it is exquisite. We begin with foie gras, followed by duck confit. It is a traditional menu from the Lyonnais region, from the land of our ancestors. From the region of your ancestors, I asked. Yes, she said. From the time when my great-grandfather served the king. In French, she murmured to Armand. My great-grandfather was a butcher in Lyon, but this one will swallow anything. Oh, wow, I said. A butcher for the king. That is impressive. Celeste kicked me under the table. Dad, stop talking. You're embarrassing me. I looked at her. Her face was flushed. She was ashamed of me. Ashamed of the man who had paid for her teeth, her clothes, her education, her ballet lessons, and her interior design degree. I'm just making conversation, sweetheart, I said. Well, don't, she snapped. Just sign the papers and let's be done with it. The cruelty was casual, effortless. It was second nature to them. They had stopped seeing me as a person. I was a resource, a mechanism, a means to an end. I finished my chicken. I wiped my mouth on the linen napkin. You know, I said, now that we're all family, I've been thinking I ought to learn some French. Be nicer to understand what you're saying to each other at the table. Armand choked on his wine. He coughed hard, his face going purple. Colette thumped him on the back, visibly alarmed. Oh no, Walt, she said quickly. English is the language of business, the language of the future. There is absolutely no need for you to struggle with French. It is a very difficult language for people to pick up later in life. In French, she added, he would sound like a cow attempting to sing opera. You're probably right, I said. I'll stick to what I know. Driving trucks and writing checks. Exactly, Lucian said. You have a very special talent for writing checks, Mr. Dunning. Play to your strengths. He slid the contract across the table toward me. He uncapped a fountain pen a Cartier probably bought on credit or lifted from someone's desk. Sign here, he said, pointing. And here. Then we can all go celebrate. I looked at the paper. I looked at the pen. I looked at their faces, greedy, expectant, contemptuous. I picked up the pen. The humiliation was over. The dinner was done. The appetizers were finished. It was time for the main course, and I was about to serve them a dish they would never forget. The Cartier pen felt cold and heavy in my hand, a weighted instrument of execution. Lucien hovered at my shoulder like a vulture waiting for the carcass to stop twitching. On the table, the contract lay open, a thick stack of cream-colored pages bound with a silk ribbon. It looked elegant. It looked official. It looked like a death warrant for my bank account. Just sign right there, Mr. Dunning, Lucian said, tapping the signature line with a manicured fingernail. There was a small, sticky flag marking the spot. He was trying to rush me past the reading part. I reached into my breast pocket and produced a pair of reading glasses, cheap drugstore magnifiers, the kind that cost $5 at a gas station counter. I settled them onto my nose with great deliberate care. I watched Colette's eyes roll. I watched Armand glance at his watch. "Ought to hold your horses, son," I said, my voice slow and graveled. My daddy always told me never to put my name on something I hadn't read. Even if it takes all night. Lucian let out a breath that sounded like air leaking from a tire. "Mr. Dunning, please. This is standard boilerplate. Exactly what we discussed, a family trust to protect Celeste, to safeguard the assets." Gus leaned in, planting his elbows on the table, crowding into the Beauchamp space. "Actually, my client likes to be thorough. We're talking about $3 million here. That's a lot of miles on the road. Let him read." I bent my head over the document. I began to read. And as I read, the blood in my veins started running hotter than radiator fluid in the middle of July. This was not a trust. This was an ambush. Article 4, Section B stated that the trustee listed as Lucien Beauchamp would hold sole discretionary power over the allocation of funds for lifestyle maintenance. Lifestyle maintenance. That was a polished way of saying he could burn my money on gambling, wine, and whatever else he pleased, and Celeste would have no vote in any of it. I looked up. "Lifestyle maintenance," I said, pressing my finger to the words. "That sounds like an unimportant one." "Does that cover my trucks?" Armand scoffed. "Trucks? Why on earth would it cover trucks? It covers the necessities appropriate to their station Walt housing in the proper arrondissement's travel wardrobe. One must maintain appearances." In French, he murmured to Colette. "He thinks we're going to spend his money on tires. The man is a peasant." I went back to the page. I turned it slowly. The paper crinkled loudly in the silence. Article 7 caught my eye. It was buried inside a paragraph of dense legal language, the kind engineered to make your eyes lose focus and slide past it. It granted the trustee power of attorney over any future inheritances or liquidations of the beneficiary's familial assets. I went still. I read it a second time. They weren't just coming for the $3 million. They were reaching for the trucking empire. They knew, or at least suspected, there was more. Or they were simply throwing a wide net, hoping to snag whatever I left behind when I died. If I put my name on this, Lucien would have effective legal control over Celeste's inheritance before I was in the ground. He'd have the right to sell my fleet, my depot, my land. My grip tightened around the pen. The barrel gave a faint creak. "This section here," I said, tapping Article 7. "It mentions future assets. What does that mean exactly?" Celeste sighed loud enough to be heard across the room. She brought her hand down on the table and the silverware jumped. "Dad, come on. It just means if you leave me your house in Connecticut or whatever, Lucian can help manage the sale so I don't have to deal with the headache. He's good with these things. You're making a scene out of nothing. Good with these things. The man owed $180,000 to a casino and was renting a fabricated life on borrowed time. I looked at my daughter. Her face was flushed from wine and impatience. She wasn't looking at the contract. She was studying her reflection in the darkened window, straightening a strand of hair. She had no interest in what she was signing away. She wanted the money. She wanted the evening to end so she could slide back into her performance of royalty. "You trust him that much, Sugar?" I asked. "You trust him with everything, even what I built with my own 2 hands." She rolled her eyes. "Yes, Dad, I trust him. He's my husband, or he will be in 2 days. Unlike you, he actually understands how wealth operates. He knows how to invest. He's going to take your little nest egg and turn it into something real." Lucian puffed up his chest. "Exactly. I have opportunities, Mr. Dunning. Private equity, emerging markets. Your 3 million becomes 10 million inside of 5 years. I dropped my eyes back to the paper to hide what was in them. If I looked at him right then, I might have reached across the table. 10 million. He'd turn 3 million into nothing inside of 3 weeks. I kept reading. Article 9. In the event of a dissolution of marriage, the assets within the trust remain under the sole control of the trustee as compensation for administrative services rendered. I nearly laughed out loud. It was a prenuptial agreement running in reverse. If they divorced, he kept the money. All of it. He was billing her an administration fee for the privilege of being robbed. I looked at Gus. He had reviewed the draft earlier. He gave me a tiny, almost invisible nod. He knew. This document was the smoking gun proof of intent, proof of malice, proof that they believed I was a brainless ATM waiting to be emptied. I turned another page. The paper crinkled loudly. "Oh, for God's sake!" Colette snapped. The composure cracked. The mask slipped. "Walt, this is absolutely ridiculous. We have a reception to get to. People are waiting. You are reading this like a child sounding out the alphabet." In French, she hissed to Armand. "If he takes 1 more minute, I am going to scream. He is doing this on purpose. He is too dim to understand it, so he stares at the words, hoping they arrange themselves. Just grab his hand and force it." I looked up at her over the top of my glasses. "I'm just a slow reader, ma'am," I said. "Big words give me trouble." Lucian rose from his seat and came around behind my chair. He placed both hands on my shoulders. The grip was firm, too firm, a threat wearing the costume of warmth. "Mr. Dunning, we are all family here. We all want the same thing. We want Celeste to be happy." "Do you want Celeste to be happy?" "Of course," I said. "Then sign," he said. "Sign and show her you support her. Show her you're more than a truck driver. Show her you're a father who can provide. Show her you belong at this table." The manipulation was blunt, but it was aimed at the right wound. He was using my own love for my daughter as a crowbar. He was telling me the only way to be a good father was to be a silent, open wallet. I looked at Celeste. Her eyes had gone hard. "Dad, if you don't sign this right now, I'm walking out and you will never see me again. I mean every word of that. You are ruining everything. You are proving them right. You are proving that you are small, small." I had built a company that moves 10,000 tons of freight every day. I employ 400 people. I had stared down blizzards, hurricanes, and economic crashes that would have folded lesser men in half. And my daughter, sitting across from me in a dress I had paid for, was calling me small because I wouldn't let a grifter pick my pocket clean. The tension in the room had weight you could feel on your chest. Armand was tapping a spoon against the table in a steady metallic rhythm that sounded like a clock counting down. Colette had her wine glass in a grip so tight, her knuckles had gone white. Lucian's breath was warm on the back of my neck. They were desperate. They were scared. They needed this signature the way a drowning man needs something solid to grab. If I didn't sign, the loan sharks in Nice would be knocking on Lucian's door. If I didn't sign, the landlord of the fake castle would be changing the locks. If I didn't sign, the whole house of cards came down. I looked at the signature line. I leaned forward. I brought the tip of the pen to the page. A small bead of ink bloomed into the fiber, a single black dot. Lucien exhaled. I felt the tension leave his shoulders. Celeste smiled, sharp and triumphant and greedy. "Finally," she whispered. I wrote the letter W, the first letter of my name. Then I stopped. I lifted the pen. "Is there a problem?" Armand barked. "Why did you stop?" I turned the pen over in my fingers. I frowned at it. "This pen," I said. "It feels light. Is it real gold or just plated?" Lucien went rigid. "It is solid gold, Mr. Dunning. A family heirloom." "Is it?" I asked. I rotated it slowly under the light. I saw the small scratch along the barrel. I saw the base metal showing through the gold plating underneath. It was a fake, just like everything else in this room. Just like the castle. What you're about to hear is the moment everything sitting just beneath the surface finally broke through. I want to ask you something before we get there. If you discovered that someone you loved had been quietly working against you from the very beginning, would you confront them in the open, or would you let the truth do the talking for you? Just like the title. Just like the love they claimed to have for my daughter. I set the pen down. "I can't sign with this," I said. "Something about it isn't right. Use your own pen," then Celeste snapped. She pushed up from her chair. "Use a crayon for all I care. Just put your name on the paper, Dad. Stop putting us through this." I looked at her. Really looked at her. I could see the desperation burning in her eyes, but it wasn't a hunger for my love. It wasn't a longing for my presence. It was desperation for the life she believed she was owed. She was ready to throw me to the wolves for a seat at a table built out of sawdust and glue. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my own pen, a cheap ballpoint blue ink, the kind that comes 30 to a box. I clicked it. The click was sharp in the quiet. I held the pen above the paper. Lucien leaned in. "Do it," he murmured. "Change her life." I took one final look at the contract. I read the clauses designed to strip away my dignity, my legacy, my self-respect, the words that ground 40 years of blood and sweat down to an administration fee for a French con artist. I breathed in slow. "You're right, Lucien," I said. "I should do what I do best." I pressed the pen to the page, but not to sign my name. Instead, I dragged a single thick diagonal line from the top left corner to the bottom right, leaning hard enough that the paper tore slightly. Then I drove a second line the other way, crossing the first, a giant X carved over the text. The tearing sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Lucien recoiled as though I'd touched him with a hot iron. "What? What are you doing?" he stammered. I got to my feet. I shoved the chair back. I picked up the contract. "I'm editing," I said. I tore the page clean out of the binder. I balled it up in my fist. Celeste screamed. "Dad, what are you doing?" "That is a legal document." "No, sweetheart," I said. I dropped the crumpled paper onto the empty plate in front of me. "That's garbage." The room came apart. Armand was shouting in French. Colette was gasping, hands clutched to her chest. Lucien looked like the floor had dropped out from under him. But I wasn't finished. I looked over at Gus. He passed me the second folder, the real one, the one carrying the truth. I cleared my throat. That sound alone shut them up. You wanted me to sign a contract, I said. My voice was flat, cold, hard as poured concrete. You wanted me to hand over my assets. You wanted to manage my lifestyle. I tossed the new folder onto the table. It skated across the linen and clipped Lucian's wine glass, making it sing. I think we ought to start with your lifestyle, Lucian, I said. The $180,000 you owe the man in Nice, for instance. Or the fact that the chateau is a rental. Or the fact that your parents are flat broke. I looked at Celeste. She hadn't moved. Her mouth was hanging open. Happy wedding day, sweetheart, I said. I brought you something. It's called the truth. The color drained from Lucian's face, leaving ash behind. He stared at the folder. He stared at me. And in that moment, the arrogance collapsed. The nobility collapsed. What remained was nothing but a rat caught in a trap. And I was the cat. And I was hungry. Armand Beauchamp stared at the folder sitting on the table as though it were a device counting down. His face was a mask of flushed outrage, the veins in his neck pressing hard against his collar. He glanced at Gus, then at me, and then he made the mistake of opening his mouth one last time in his native tongue. He turned toward Colette and hissed, rapid and venomous in French. This American pig is bluffing. He knows nothing. He's trying to frighten us because he is too cheap to pay. Don't look at the papers. Just call the police and have him thrown out. He is a peasant trying to sit on a throne. I let him finish. I watched his lips move. I watched the spittle fly from his mouth as he worked himself up. I let the silence settle after he was done. I let it sit there 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I took a sip of the $20,000 wine. I swirled it slowly. I looked Armand dead in the eye, and then I spoke. Monsieur Laurent, I said. My voice was soft, not the rough voice of the truck driver, smooth, precise. The French of a man who had spent a decade negotiating shipping contracts in the boardrooms of Marseille. The French of a man who knew the language far better than the pretender sitting across from him. Mr. Dunning continued in flawless French. I assure you, I am not bluffing. And as for being a peasant, I've always found that peasants are often the only ones who truly understand the value of the ground beneath their feet. Whereas you, my friend, are standing on quicksand. The sound that came out of Colette's throat wasn't quite human. It was a strangled gasp, a sharp pull of air like a gasket breaking. Her hand flew to her chest, and her elbow caught her wineglass. The crystal stem, filled with the Romany Kai, tipped and fell. Dark red liquid spread across the white tablecloth, like a wound opening up, soaking into the fabric and dripping down onto her Chanel lap. She didn't move. She made no effort to stop it. She only stared at me. Her eyes were wide, enormous, terrifyingly pale against her painted face. Armand's mouth fell open but produced no sound. He looked like a fish dragged up onto a dock, gulping, drowning in open air. The color left his face so fast it was as if someone had pulled a drain. He went from red to a sick, watery gray in an instant. Lucian dropped his fork. It hit the china plate with a harsh, metallic clang that rang out in the dead silence. He looked at me with naked, undisguised terror. He understood in that split second. He knew the game wasn't simply over. The game had been rigged against him from the moment I stepped through the door. Celeste was the last one to catch on. She looked at me. She looked at them. She blinked. "Dad," she whispered. "Since when? Since when do you speak French?" "Since 1984, Celeste," I said back in English. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table beside the spreading puddle of wine. When I was building the European logistics network. When I was putting in 18-hour days in meetings with port authorities in Le Havre. You were a baby. You don't remember. But I speak it. I read it and I understand every word of it. I turned my gaze back to Armand. I switched back to French. I understood when you called me a pig. I understood when you called my daughter a cow. I understood when you said you'd park me in a corner at the wedding like a piece of broken furniture. Armand began to shake. His hands trembled so badly he had to grip the edge of the table to hold himself steady. Monsieur Dunning, he stammered. His French had gone suddenly weak, faltering. It was a misunderstanding. A joke. We have a dry sense of humor in our family. A joke, I repeated. I reached into the folder Gus had put on the table. I drew out a single sheet of paper bearing a bank letterhead. "How is this a joke, Armand?" I asked. I slid it across to him. It passed right through the wine puddle, the bottom edge coming up stained red. "It's a notice of default," I said. "From the bank in Lyon, the one holding the mortgage on the dry cleaning businesses you used to launder money for the local syndicate. It states here that you are 3 months behind on the settlement payments. It states that if you don't pay by the 1st of the month, you go to prison." Armand stared at the paper. He didn't touch it. He looked at it as though it might burn him. How did you get this?" he whispered. "I bought it," I said. He lifted his eyes. They were glassy. You what?" "I bought the debt, Armand," I said. "I called the bank this morning. Gus handled the wire transfer. It cost me pennies on the dollar. They were glad to be rid of it. Thought it was a bad loan, but I told them I knew the debtor personally." I settled back in my chair. I smiled. It was a shark's smile. "I am your creditor, Armand. I own you. Your debt belongs to me. Your history belongs to me. And at this moment, I'm holding the lever that controls what comes next for you. One call is all it takes. French law enforcement stationed at Charles de Gaulle before your plane even boards. Fraud charges filed before anyone at this table touches their crème brûlée." Colette broke down. The crying was soft, almost pathetic, the kind of sound that's designed to make you feel guilty. She pressed both hands over her face, her diamond rings clinking together like loose change. "Please," she managed between sobs. "Please, Walt, we are family, family." That word came out of me as a laugh, short and ugly. A quarter-hour ago, I was a peasant to these people. A quarter-hour ago, I was nothing but an open checkbook. Funny how family appears the moment I've got them by the collar. I shifted my attention to Lucien, the prince, the consultant, the man with a gambling problem he couldn't outrun. He was doing everything short of sliding under the table, shoulders hunched, body pulled tight, trying to disappear into the upholstery. Sweat was breaking out across his forehead and tracking down into his eyes. "And then there's you," I said. I slid another document from the folder, a spreadsheet. $180,000, I said. "Ode to a Mr. Petro in Nice." Mr. Petro is not a patient man. I had a word with someone close to him earlier today. The sound Lucien made wasn't dignified. It was high and thin, like an animal that's been struck. "No," he breathed. You actually spoke to them." "I did," I said. I let Lucien Beauchamp's name come up in conversation. Told them he was expecting a substantial inheritance. Told them he was about to become the son-in-law of a wealthy American who built his fortune in trucking. Something shifted behind Lucien's eyes, a small, desperate flash of hope. You put in a word for me." I shook my head slowly. "No son. What I told them, I said, was that there would be no wedding, that the trust fund he'd been dealing was a fiction, that he had zero reach into my finances, and that he was at this very moment sitting at L'Ambroisie in Paris, drinking $20,000 wine while their money sat uncollected. The blood left Lucien's face all at once. His eyes cut to the entrance like he was calculating whether Mr. Petro might already be on his way. Why? His voice cracked on the word. Why do that to me? They'll kill me. You tried to take my company, I said. You came after everything I spent my life building. You sat across from me and looked me straight in the eye and fed me lies. You dressed my daughter up in a fantasy, convinced her she was marrying royalty when she was really signing on with a card cheat in a borrowed suit. My eyes moved to Celeste. She hadn't shifted an inch, white as porcelain, hands folded in her lap like she'd forgotten what to do with them. She was watching Lucien with the focused, hollow look of someone trying to reconcile a face they thought they knew, studying the dampness above his lip, reading the fear that had taken over his expression. Celeste, I said, keeping my voice even. She turned toward me slowly. Her eyes had gone flat. Every bit of that high-handed superiority gone, the condescension gone. Just a woman sitting in the wreckage of something she'd built in her imagination. There's one more item, I said. My hand went into my breast pocket and came back out with a small black velvet box, the kind that holds a ring. Celeste's brow creased. She didn't understand. It isn't a ring, I told her. You've got more than enough of those. I opened the box. Sitting inside was a key, plain silver, hanging from a Dior logo keychain. You were humiliated about that dress, I said. You were furious when the transaction got rejected. You were livid that those women at the counter treated you like you were trying to walk out without paying. She gave a slow, almost dazed nod. So I handled it, I said. I set the key on the linen. I acquired the store, I said. Celeste's mouth fell open. You bought the dress? No, I said. I bought the store itself. The franchise rights to the location on Avenue Montaigne, the exact one you walked into. I got the holding company on the phone this morning. They needed to move the asset fast, a liquidation situation. My offer was accepted. I slid the key across the table toward her. The building is mine, Celeste. The inventory is mine. The employment contracts belonging to every woman who watched your card get cut in two. Those are mine now, too. She stared at the key without blinking. Her hand crept toward it. Her fingers were visibly shaking. So I can have the dress now. The hope in her voice was almost painful, small, childlike. The way a kid sounds asking if they can still have dessert right after they've set the kitchen on fire. I pressed my palm over the key. No, I said. I held her gaze. I bought that store to terminate their employment, I said. And I bought it to make sure you can never set foot inside it again. You're banning me, she whispered. That's right, I said. Banned from the store. Banned from attaching my name to anything in this city. Banned from every account I carry. Banned from my business entirely. I pushed back from the table and got to my feet. The chair legs screamed against the floor. $300,000. That's what I committed to a wedding that will not occur. $50,000 to purchase your fiancé's debt so I could use it as a leash. $5 million for a retail property just to send a message. I fastened my jacket button. I surveyed the table, the dynasty in ruins, the manufactured aristocrats, and the daughter who'd convinced herself she'd outgrown the man who gave her everything. Armand was crying without trying to hide it. Colette had fixed her gaze on the wine stain spreading across the cloth. Lucien couldn't stop trembling. Gus rose from his chair, snapped his briefcase shut. He caught my eye and gave a single nod. "We're finished, Walt," he said. I took one last look at Celeste. "You wanted the fairy tale," I said. "So here's the final chapter. The carriage is a pumpkin again. The horses are mice. And the princess, she's on her own now." I turned my back on the table. I moved toward those heavy oak doors. Behind me, I heard Celeste's chair scrape back hard. Then her heels on the floor, coming fast. "Dad!" Her voice broke into a scream. "Dad, don't go!" I kept moving. I shouldered through the doors and came out into the main dining room, heads turned at every table. What they saw was a man in a gray suit moving like he had somewhere to be, a lawyer behind him with a briefcase, and chasing them both a young woman in a white dress with mascara tracking down her cheeks. "Dad, please." Her grip landed on my arm. Her fingers dug in through the fabric. "Everyone's watching. Don't do this. Don't leave me here with them. They're broke. Lucian is broke. How do I get back to the hotel? How do I pay for any of it?" I went still. I looked at her hand on my sleeve, that hand wearing the diamond engagement ring, the one I was now fairly certain was either counterfeit or still owed on. I lifted her fingers away from me carefully. "Work it out," I said. "I have nothing left." She choked. "You canceled my cards. You stopped the transfer. I have nothing." "You've got your lineage," I told her. "You've got your nobility. You've got a very distinguished set of in-laws. Go ask them." "They're broke," she cried. "You know exactly how broke they are. You just finished burying them." "I didn't bury anyone, Celeste," I said. "I just cut the power and let people see the room clearly. They built this wreckage themselves. You just handed them the tools. You were embarrassed by me. Embarrassed by the honest labor that kept the lights on in your life." I stepped close enough that only she could hear. "You told me oil and water don't mix," I said. "You were right about that. I'm the oil. I'm what makes the engine run. You're the water. And water, when it meets enough heat, it just disappears." I walked away from her, out through the restaurant doors and into the Paris night. The rain was done. Stars had come out overhead. Her voice followed me, my name over and over, getting smaller. Behind it, I caught the maitre d' asking her firmly to keep it down. Then the door swallowed the sound. I crossed to the car waiting at the curb. Gus had the door open. I lowered myself in and let the seat take my weight. Drew a slow breath all the way down. It was finished. Whatever needed saying had been said. Gus settled in next to me and knocked twice on the partition. "Airport," he told the driver. The car rolled forward. I didn't turn to look back through the rear window. I didn't need to see the restaurant. I could picture well enough what was happening at that table, the panic cresting, the blame beginning to move around the room, looking for somewhere to land. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. The number staring back at me was meaningfully smaller than yesterday's. A lot smaller. And yet something in my chest felt lighter than it had in a long, long time. "You think I went too far?" I asked Gus. He looked over at me and worked loose his tie. "Walt," he said, "you purchased a Dior boutique for the sole purpose of banning your own daughter. That's not a bridge burning. That's scripture. That's the Old Testament." "She had to feel it," I said. "She felt it," Gus said. "Oh, trust me on that. You didn't just torch the bridge, you evaporated the river underneath it." I let that sit. Shut my eyes. The exhaustion was deep in my bones, the kind that lives below tired. But as the car threaded through the streets of Paris toward the private jet that would carry me back to my quiet house in Connecticut, something settled over me that I hadn't felt in a long time. A kind of peace. I'd walked out of that room without a daughter, but I'd walked out with myself, And sometimes that's the trade you have to make. I was Walt Dunning, truck driver, and I was going home. I stood beside the open door of the black Mercedes engine idling with a low rumble that carried through the quiet Paris street like a warning. I'd shaken Celeste loose. I'd turned my back. But rats don't abandon a sinking ship without a fight, not when there's still a lifeboat to claw toward. The restaurant's heavy doors blew open again. This time it wasn't just Celeste. It was the whole circus. Lucien came stumbling out first, looking like a man who'd just taken a fist to the stomach. Armand and Colette followed behind their faces, crumpling masks of panic mascara, tracking down in dark lines. A grotesque little parade of collapsed ambition spilling onto the sidewalk under the street lamps. "You Mr. Dunning, wait!" Lucien called out. He came toward me at a half-run, arms reaching forward. "Please, we can come to an arrangement. The debt, the 180,000. We can set up payments. I have things moving. A deal closing next week in Zurich." I didn't get into the car. I stayed where I was, leaning against the doorframe with my arms folded. I took him in, the sweat bleeding through the collar of that expensive shirt, the raw fear behind his eyes. He wasn't grieving Celeste. He wasn't concerned about his honor. He was concerned about his kneecaps. Mr. Petro in Nice was not a man known for extended patience. "A payment plan," I said. "That's what you're after." "Yes, exactly." Lucien gulped air, pulling up short a few feet from me. He didn't push any closer, just a bridge loan, until the wedding happens, until I can get stable again. I let out a short laugh, hard and clipped. "There's no wedding, Lucien," I said. "And stability isn't coming back to you anytime soon. You're going to be on your hands and knees for a good long while. But since the debt came up, let's discuss collateral." "Collateral?" His face went blank. "You owe me money," I said. "I hold your debt note, and standing here you look like a man getting ready to run, so I'm calling it in now." I held out my hand palm facing up. "The watch," I said. Lucien went rigid. His right hand moved on instinct to cover his left wrist. The watch was a Patek Philippe, or presented itself as one. It was likely the last thing he possessed that wasn't leased, borrowed, or lifted from someone else. My watch," he said. "Hand it over," I said. Not loud, but the words landed clean and sharp in the night air. "It goes toward what you owe me. Unless you'd rather I ring Mr. Petro right now and tell him you're declining to cooperate." Lucien looked at me, then at the phone in my other hand. His whole frame shook. Slowly, almost painfully, he undid the clasp and worked the watch off his wrist. He passed it across. His hand was trembling enough that he nearly fumbled it on the way. I took it and held it under the streetlight. Heavy, solid gold. Probably purchased with the deposit money from some other father he'd deceived. I tucked it into my jacket pocket. "The keys as well," I said. "Keys, the Porsche," I said. "The silver 9111 you pulled up to my house in Connecticut Inn. The one you're leasing through a shell company that I now happen to hold a lien against because I bought that note from the leasing agency this morning." He stared at me. His jaw hung open. You bought the car note too." "I bought everything, Lucien," I said. "That's what I've been telling you. I understand how to encircle a problem. I know logistics. Now give me the keys. You're walking." He shoved a hand into his pocket. Out came the key fob. He held it for a moment, knuckles going white around it. That little piece of plastic was everything. The speed, the image, the symbol of a success he'd never actually earned. Then he let it drop into my palm. I turned and pitched it over to Gus, who was standing near the Mercedes trunk. "Get someone to collect the car, Gus," I said. "To sell it off. Now get these people out of my sight." I moved to climb into the car. That's when it detonated. Not literally. but the explosion of a man who's been stripped of everything and has to point the blame somewhere. That's its own kind of blast. He couldn't aim it at me. I was too far above him now, too untouchable. So he swung the only direction left open to him. He turned on Celeste. She was standing there on the sidewalk, arms pulled tight around herself, shaking in that white dress, tears cutting down her face. She was watching him with pleading eyes, waiting for him to reach out to say that the two of them would come through this, that what they had was bigger than any of this. "Lucien," she whispered, "what do we do now?" He looked at her and his face curled into something ugly, a snarl pulled straight from contempt. "What do we do?" he mimicked. "There is no we, you stupid cow. Look at the damage here. Your father came in and gutted me." Celeste recoiled like she'd been struck. "Jean-Loup, shut your mouth," he snapped. His voice cracked off the stone facades of the buildings. "You worthless American trash. You told me he was soft. You told me he was just a checkbook with legs. You said he'd put his name on anything. You said he lived for your approval." I didn't know she wept. "You didn't know a single thing," he came back at her. He moved a step toward her, aggressive. "You floated around playing princess, burning money you didn't have, showing off your daddy the truck driver. I put up with you because of what was supposed to come with you. Do you understand that every morning I looked at your face and forced myself through it because I believed there was a payout at the end of it?" I stopped moving toward the car. I stood and I watched. Every part of me that was her father wanted to step between them, wanted to make him swallow those words. But the part of me that understood what was at stake knew she had to let this wash over her. She had to absorb every syllable. This was the antidote. Bitter as anything she'd ever tasted, but the only thing that could actually clear her vision. Celeste stood on the pavement, her mouth open, her eyes unable to process what she was seeing. It was like watching someone pull off their face and show you what was underneath. You don't love me," she breathed. "Love you." His laugh was high and vicious. "I love fine food. I love cars that move fast. I love staying out of a cell. You were just a means to an end. And the end isn't coming anymore. You are nothing, less than nothing. You are a liability." He spat on the ground beside her feet. Armand and Colette stepped forward then, not to shield her. "You fool," Armand turned on Lucien, shoving his own son hard in the chest. "You handed this to him. You let the American run circles around us. I told you to get the signature before the food came out. I told you not to give him time to read it. Don't put this on me." Lucien shoved back. "You were the one draining the wine. You were the one throwing insults at him to his face. You arrogant old man. You showed him every card we had." Enough, Colette's voice came out shrill. She grabbed Armand's arm. "Stop it, both of you. We have to fix this." "Walt," she spun toward me. She sprinted to the car window. She beat on the glass with both palms. "Walt, please," she begged. Every trace of composure was gone. Every pretense of breeding dissolved. Just a frightened woman in a wine-stained dress. "Don't drive away from us. We have nowhere. The hotel will throw us out tonight. We have no way home." I looked at her through the window. I didn't touch the button. I just looked. Out on the sidewalk, Celeste stood in the center of all of it, alone. The people she had chosen, her fiancé, her future in-laws, were tearing into each other like starving animals over the last scrap. Lucien was shoving his father. Colette was clawing at the car door. French and English tangled together in a screaming mess of accusation and greed. And Celeste was utterly still. She looked at me. Our eyes connected through the tinted glass. I watched it land on her. I watched the exact moment her heart broke, not because I had walked away from her, but because she was finally seeing with clear eyes what she had traded everything to have. She saw the decay underneath it. She saw the true shape of what she'd believed in. She watched Lucian screaming filth at his own mother. She looked down at the dress, that symbol of everything she'd wanted to project. She took one step toward the car. She shaped a single word with her mouth. Dad. My hand went to the door handle. I stayed there a moment. I could pull it open. I could reach for her. I could bring her in from the cold and the humiliation. I could drive her away from all of this and let the whole ugly night dissolve behind us. But if I did that, she would carry the wrong lesson out of Paris. She'd spend years blaming me for the scene at the restaurant, instead of blaming them for the wreckage of her life. She needed the cold ground under her feet. She needed the sting of the night air. She needed to find her own route back, not mine. My hand came away from the handle. I knocked on the partition. Drive, I told him. The Mercedes pulled away without a sound. I watched them in the rearview mirror as we pulled away. Lucian tried chasing the car for a few stumbling strides before abandoning it and putting his foot through a trash can. Colette crumpled onto the pavement. Armand stood with both hands pressed to the sides of his head. And Celeste, she just stood there beneath the street lamp, a white shape growing smaller and smaller until the distance swallowed her. She didn't come running this time. She stayed put and watched her safety net disappear. Gus looked at me, said nothing. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon from the crystal decanter built into the armrest, passed me the glass. I took it. My hand didn't waver. That was hard, Walt, he said, his voice low. Raising a child is hard, Gus, I said. Saving one is harder. I looked down at the Audemars Piguet watch resting in my palm. Solid, gold, still ticking. Tick, tick, tick. Time had run out for the Beauchamp. But for Celeste, the clock was only just starting. She had no money, no place to sleep, not a single person she knew in Paris. She was about to find out what she was genuinely made of. Was she her father's daughter? Or had she just been riding in the passenger seat of her own life all along? I finished the bourbon. Shall we go back to Connecticut tonight? I said. I've got trucks to run. Gus gave a nod. And the girl? He asked. I looked out the window at the lights of Paris bleeding past in a blur. If she's a Dunning, I said, she'll find a way through. If she's not, then she belongs out here with them. The car picked up speed and merged onto the highway, the city of pretense falling away behind us. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, just to listen to the engine and wait for the plane that would carry me back to a world where work had weight and a handshake meant something. I was finished with nobility. I was ready for the mud again. I eased back into the seat of the black Mercedes, the leather exhaling quietly under me. A sound of finality, a period dropped at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. Gus settled in beside me, and I heard him release a breath he must have been holding for the better part of an hour. The air inside the car was still carrying the faint smell of lemon polish and conditioned air, nothing like the rain and desperation waiting on the other side of the glass. The driver engaged the gear. His eyes checked the rearview mirror, waiting for direction. Drive, I said. The word came out rough. Don't stop for anything. The car eased away from the curb in front of L'Ambroisie, smooth and quiet. I did not want to look back. Every instinct I had was telling me to keep my face toward the windshield, to focus forward, to leave the wreckage where it lay. But I am a father, and a father always looks. I turned my head. Celeste was standing exactly where I'd left her, frozen on the wet cobblestones, like something carved from ice and regret. That white dress, the one she'd waged a war over, the one that had cost her more than she understood, was muddied at the hem. It glowed pale and ghost-like beneath the street lamps. She looked small, smaller than I'd ever seen her. Even as a little girl, she'd filled every room she was in. Her energy, her demands, her laugh. Now she looked like a paper doll left out in the weather. Then she moved. The truth of it finally struck her, that I was genuinely leaving, that nothing I'd said was theater, that the net was gone. It knocked the strings out from under her. "Dad!" she screamed. Raw and primal, that sound, it pushed right through the soundproofed glass of the car. She started running. She ran in her high heels, lurching over the cobblestones. She ran in the $20,000 dress that was legally mine now. She ran past Lucian, who was still hurling blame at his parents on the sidewalk. She ran past the maitre d', who watched with a look caught somewhere between pity and professional remove. She came after my car. "Dad, please don't go," she called out. Arms stretched ahead of her, reaching for the bumper, reaching for anything solid, reaching for rescue. "I have no money. I have nowhere to go, please." The driver's foot came off the gas slightly. A natural reflex, you see a young woman in tears, running after a car, you ease up. I leaned toward the partition. "Drive," I said, and this time it came out low and hard. "Don't slow down." The driver dipped his chin and pressed the pedal. The engine answered with a deep surge, and the gap between us and her widened. I kept watching through the tinted glass. She was running harder now, desperation feeding her legs, something that fear couldn't. Her hair had broken free of its careful updo and was flying loose around her face. Her mascara had carved dark channels down both cheeks. "I'm sorry," she screamed. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I love you. Please open the door." My hand stirred in my lap. It would be the simplest thing in the world. A knock on the partition. Tell him to stop. Open the door. Pull her in. I could wrap my jacket around her shoulders, take her to the hotel, order food, sit next to her, and tell her it was all going to be fine. I had the means. I had always had the means to fix things. But fixing this would break her. If that door opened, I'd be teaching her that betrayal costs nothing. That she could look me in the face, choose those people over me, and I would still be there wiping off the damage. I'd be proving everything the Beauchamp believed about Americans, that we're soft, that we're easy marks, that we'll absorb whatever's done to us and come back for more. And worse than any of that, I'd be stealing the only real chance she had to become someone worth knowing. She needed this bottom. She needed to feel the unpadded street beneath her, with no red carpet underneath it. She needed to understand what cold felt like, what hunger felt like, what genuine solitude felt like. Only then would she grasp in her bones what it had taken me a lifetime to build for her. So my hand stayed in my lap. I pressed my fist closed until my fingernails found my palm. She gained on us briefly as we worked through a bend, but then the road opened up straight, and the Mercedes stretched its legs without effort. She lunged one last time, her fingertips grazing the taillight, leaving a smear of desperation on the red plastic. Then she went down. Her heel caught in a drain grate, or maybe her legs just gave out. She hit the wet pavement hard, the white dress billowing wide around her, like a parachute that had failed to open. She didn't get back up. She just knelt there in the middle of the road, in the rain beneath the indifferent lights of Paris. She was alone. Truly alone. Lucien wasn't running to her. He was back on the sidewalk doing damage control, most likely already working out how to pin his debts on her. His parents were useless. Her friends weren't here. Her cards were shredded plastic. Her hotel room was locked. She had nothing of substance left. She was wearing a dress she didn't own. She was standing in a city whose language she didn't really speak. She had no cash, no ride, no plan. She was 28 years old. And for the first time in her life, she had arrived at the complete and total bottom. I watched her until another corner came, and she disappeared, a small white point absorbed into the gray city. I turned back around in my seat. The breath that left me shook my whole body. It felt like I had cut off my own arm and made myself watch it. "You holding up?" Gus asked quietly. He wasn't looking at me. He was fixed on his window, giving me the dignity of the moment. "No," I said. My voice had gone thick. "I'm not holding up. That is my little girl, Gus." "She needed it," he said. "I know she needed it," I said. "I know that down to my marrow, but knowing doesn't make it feel any less like hell." "It is supposed to feel like hell," he said. "That's the proof that you're a good father. A bad father wouldn't lose a minute of sleep over it. A weak one would have hit the brakes back there. You're doing the hard work, Walt, the work nobody else could do for her." I dragged both hands down my face. My skin felt worn. "She has her return ticket," I said. "I didn't touch her flight home. It's waiting in her email." Gus nodded slowly. "She'll sort herself out. She has a phone and she has legs. She'll make it to the airport." He paused. "Might take her a day. She might end up sleeping in a lobby or trading those earrings you gave her for cab fare, but she'll get there." "And if she doesn't?" I asked. The fear sat in my gut like something cold and alive. "Then she isn't a Dunning," Gus said, and he said it without any softness in it at all. "But she is, Walt." I saw what was behind her eyes back there. Scared, yes, but there was anger underneath it too. And anger is good. Anger is fuel. She'll use it. I hoped he was right. God, I hoped he was right. I pulled out my phone. Part of me wanted to check whether she'd called, whether she'd sent anything, but I already knew I couldn't answer. Not tonight. Tonight she had to sit in the dark and feel it. I looked at the screen. Nothing yet. She was probably still on her knees in the rain somewhere. I put the phone back in my pocket. I looked at the empty seat beside me, the seat where she should have been if things had gone differently. If she'd had any gratitude in her. If she'd had any kindness. But she didn't. She'd been a snob who wanted to sand me out of her life entirely. I shut my eyes and let the rhythm of the tires on the road settle over me. I thought about the miles I'd logged to pay for that dress. The lonely nights in motel rooms that paid for that ring. I'd put in my time. Now she'd put in hers. The car swung onto the highway and pointed itself toward the airport. The glow of Paris began thinning out behind the windows. "Goodbye, Celeste," I said quietly to no one. "I hope you find who you're supposed to be out there, because the girl who walked through those restaurant doors tonight is gone, and the woman who comes out on the other side of this, I hope I get to meet her one day, just not today." Today I was a truck driver with a cargo hold full of grief hauling it back to Connecticut, and the road ahead was long. The morning mist was lying low over the lake, wrapping itself around the reeds like thin smoke. It was a quiet, the real kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't come with a price tag. Nothing like Paris. Nothing like New York. I threw the line out. The lure broke the surface with a soft plop, rings pushing out in every direction. Gus sat in the folding chair at my elbow. Beer in the cup holder, even though it was barely past 10 in the morning. He was mostly retired now. After everything that happened in Paris, he'd told me he'd had enough stimulation to last him into the next decade. "Getting anything?" Gus asked. "Not yet," I said. "They're thinking it over. Fish don't lunge at the first shiny thing that drifts by. They hold still. They watch. They make up their minds. We sat without talking for a stretch. Comfortable. The silence of two men who've been through the fire together and don't need to narrate it. 6 months, Walt, Gus said at last. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were on the bobber sitting still on the gray water. You hear from her at all? I gave the reel a small turn, just enough to pull some tension into the line. Got an email yesterday, I said. And? Gus asked. I haven't replied yet, I said. Gus nodded once. Took a pull from his beer. What did she say? Short message, I told him. She wasn't asking for money. Wasn't asking me to buy her a ticket home. She said, "Happy birthday, Dad." And she put a photo in it. A photo of what? A pay stub, I said. Gus let out a soft laugh, the kind that startled a duck off the bank nearby. A pay stub, he repeated. From where? A diner in Queens, I said. The Rust Bucket. One of those greasy spoon places out on Northern Boulevard. She's working double shifts, waiting tables. Waitressing, Gus said. Celeste Dunning. The girl who wouldn't pull on anything without a label is now running plates in Queens. She is, I said, and by all accounts, she's good at it. The manager told my investigator she's his hardest worker. On time every shift. Doesn't grumble. Picks up the hours when the other girls go home sick. The investigator, Gus said. You've still got someone on her. I'm her father, Gus, I said. I cut her off financially. That doesn't mean I turned off the part of me that needs to know she's okay. I need to know she's eating. I'm not stepping in. I'm not dropping a check on her doorstep. I'm just watching from a distance. She's living her life. Where? Gus asked. Studio apartment in Astoria, I told him. 4th floor walk-up. No doorman. No view to speak of just a brick wall and a fire escape out the window. She covers the rent herself. Cash and tips. Gus shook his head slowly. That is one hell of a 180, Walt. Half a year ago, she was sipping $20,000 wine and talking about you like you were hired help. Now she's the one pouring coffee for men who look just like you. That's the whole point, I said. She needed to be around the people she used to look down on. Not just near them, she needed to serve them. She needed to see that the man in work boots isn't dirty. He's tired. He's what holds everything up. And she needed to learn in her hands what a dollar actually is, not a piece of paper, but a piece of time. A piece of someone's life. I looked out across the lake. The mist was pulling back now, and the far bank was coming clear, the trees over there going orange and red. Autumn was moving in. There was something else in the email, I said. Yeah, Gus asked. She apologized, I said. Not about the wedding, not about the money. She apologized for being ashamed of me. Said she met a truck driver last week, a regular who comes in for breakfast every Tuesday morning. Said he reminded her of me. Said she actually sat down and talked with him. A real conversation. And she said it hit her. She'd been looking at the entire world through a smeared window her whole life and never noticed the glass was dirty. Gus smiled. Sounds like she's growing up, Walt. She's getting there, I said. She's not there yet. She's still got road to cover, but she's the one behind the wheel now. That's all I ever wanted. What about the money? Gus asked. The $300,000, the wedding fund. I reeled the line in a few turns. Checked the bait. Still holding. I spent it, I said. Gus raised an eyebrow. On what new boat? A trip somewhere? No, I said. I put it into a scholarship fund. A scholarship? Gus asked. The Walt Dunning International Exchange Program, I said. For kids of long-haul truckers, specifically ones who want to study foreign languages and culture. Gus started really laughing then. The belly kind. He slapped his knee. You're telling me you set up a fund to send truckers' kids to learn French? I smiled. First real smile I'd had in 6 months. Why not? I said. Why should the Beauchamps of this world be the only people who speak the language of diplomacy? Why should culture cost a fortune to get into? I want the next generation of blue-collar kids to be able to walk into a place like L'Ambroisie and read the menu without turning it upside down. I want them to look a snob straight in the eye and tell him exactly where to go in flawless Parisian French. That right there, Gus said, pressing his knuckles to the corner of his eye, is poetry. That is genuine justice. It's investment, I said. I'm investing in dignity. We went quiet again. The water worked against the side of the boat with a soft, steady sound. Whatever happened to the royals? Gus asked. The Beauchamp. I cast the line out again. High arc landed far out in the deep water. Scattered to the wind, I said. Armand is doing time in a minimum security facility in Lyon tax fraud. Turns out I wasn't the only creditor he'd been ducking. Colette is living with her sister in a small flat in Marseille. Word is she's been listing her jewelry on eBay, most of it fake apparently. And Lucien is in the wind. Last anyone heard, he was washing dishes at a hostel in Portugal. Mr. Petro in Nice has a long memory. Lucien has to keep moving. He'll be running the rest of his life. Gus nodded slowly. So you won then, he said. I looked at him. Did I? I turned my hands over in my lap. Old hands. Scarred, spotted. Hands that had worked a steering wheel for decades, worked a gear shift, held a baby bottle, signed contracts, torn them up. I didn't do this to win Gus, I said. You don't beat your children, you raise them. And sometimes raising them means picking them up. Sometimes it means letting them hit the floor so they can learn how to get back up on their own. I lost my daughter for a while, I went on. Lost the little girl who used to believe I could hang the moon if I felt like it. But I think I might be getting a woman back. A real one. One who understands what honest work costs. One who knows that respect is built, not handed down. I checked the phone. The email was still sitting there. Happy birthday, Dad. I pressed reply. Typed 2 words. I am proud. I didn't hit send. Not yet. I'd let her work a few more shifts first. Let her make it through the winter on her own terms. Let her stack up a little more of that hard-won strength. But I'd send it. I put the phone back in my pocket. I got a strike. The rod tip bent toward the water. The line pulled taut. I pushed myself to my feet and planted them wide against the deck. I began working the reel. Whatever was on the other end was heavy, a real fighter. You got one! Gus hollered. Yeah, I called back. I got one, I hauled back. The fish pushed against me, hell-bent on staying down there in the darkness. It wanted the deep, but I didn't rush it. I had patience and I had strength. I worked it slow, giving line when it surged, taking it back when it tired. A back and forth, a negotiation like fatherhood in miniature. You grip tight. You give slack. You pull. You pray the line holds. And if you're lucky, if you're steady enough, you bring them back to you. The fish broke the surface. A base. A good-sized one. It thrashed in the net sides, flashing gold and green under the open sun. Beautiful, Gus said. I watched it working against the mesh. Still fighting. Full of life. It was beautiful precisely because it hadn't stopped struggling. I reached in. I worked the hook out careful and slow. Then I lowered the net to the waterline and tipped the fish back in. Go on, I murmured. It hung there a moment, suspended like it couldn't quite believe it. Then its tail fired once, and it was gone down into the dark, back to the current, back to everything it knew. Why'd you throw it back? Gus asked. Because, I said, dragging my palms across my jeans. It's not ready for the plate yet. Still got some growing left to do. I settled back into my seat. I reached for my coffee thermos. I looked out at the sky, wide and blue and with no ceiling on it. I was Walt Dunning, a truck driver, a millionaire, a father. And for the first time in longer than I could say, I was at peace. The road ahead was still a long one, but at least I knew whose hands were on the wheel. I'd come to understand that real wealth doesn't live in a bank balance or in rented castles across France. That's where the road brought me. Not to a courtroom, not to a shouting match, just to a quiet kind of clarity that a man can only find after he's been through the fire. It cost me my daughter for a time. It cost me the version of fatherhood I had always hoped for. I believe God doesn't let those losses go to waste, that the stripping away of what we think we want is sometimes the only way to see what we actually needed. I sat with that a long while. What I found on the other side wasn't bitterness. It was ground. Solid ground. If this story leaves you with anything, let it be this. Never let pride in what you've built blind you to who is standing at your door pretending to love it. If someone only shows up when the account is full, they are not showing up for you. Protect yourself accordingly. Keep your own counsel. The man who broadcasts his power hands it to his enemies. Let them underestimate you. And if a child loses their way, don't chase them into the dark. Hold the light steady and trust they will find it when they're ready. Celeste found it. Slowly, painfully, on a double shift at a diner in Queens. But she found it. If this story moved you or made you think, leave a comment below. I'd genuinely like to hear where it lands for you. Share it with someone who might need it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Family Revenge Stories so you don't miss what's coming. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other.